Chapter 201, The Game, Part 2. Soon, Harry, who had mastered the trick, made a discovery. The speed of the oak boat was directly related to the amount of magic power infused into it. When the boat absorbed magic passively, it moved at the pace of a young wizard jogging. However, with a more forceful infusion of magic, it could become as agile as an old-fashioned silver arrow broomstick. The cost of this, however, was significant. In just half a minute, Harry felt as exhausted as if he had played an intense game of Quidditch. The boat crashed into a cloud of dark yellow smoke, and everything around them remained barren. The pervasive mist made it impossible to determine which direction to head or where their classmates might be. "Since it's a race, why not give us a direction?" Harry muttered in frustration, exhaling the slightly foul-smelling mist he had accidentally inhaled. "Maybe it's to increase the difficulty, Harry," Hermione suggested rationally. "You still don't understand Professor Blaine's style. I can't imagine how many complex spells it would take to create such a vast swamp in the faculty dormitory. If it were just to teach us about Shin-K-Punk, there wouldn't be a need for all this." Harry opened his mouth to respond, but had to admit that Hermione's insights were often spot on. He withdrew his slightly stiff palms, and the oak boat glided forward a bit on its own momentum. As he looked at a strangely shaped, charred tree, he suddenly frowned. "Do you feel, Hermione?" Harry's voice echoed in the empty silence. "That dead tree. We passed it just a minute ago. Are we going in circles?" Harry's suspicion made Hermione raise her eyebrows. The environment was uncharted territory, and she couldn't provide a definitive answer. Without guidance from Professor Blaine and lacking any clear landmarks in the swamp, the two young wizards had chosen a random direction and continued straight. The swirling clouds and smoke, combined with the poor visibility, made it easy to lose their bearings and inadvertently circle back. Harry withdrew his hand from the wooden ball, realizing he was wasting magic without knowing where they were headed. It was time for another brainstorming session. Harry squatted in the cabin to rest, while Hermione sat opposite him, legs together, muttering to herself, "Oh, I remember reading in some Muggle books that when you're lost in the wild, you can use the sun or stars to navigate." Harry glanced up at the sky, then lowered his head dejectedly. "That's right, Hermione, but the problem is we're in the professor's lounge now, and Professor Blaine isn't going to be kind enough to create a sun or stars for us." "I knew that wouldn't be the case, Harry," Hermione replied irritably. She continued to recall those Muggle travel books, murmuring, "The direction of the water flow can also help us." Harry immediately leaned over the side of the boat. In the swamp, which was only about half a meter deep, the water's surface was as smooth as a silver mirror, showing no signs of movement. Feeling a bit frustrated, Harry was about to turn back when something caught his eye. Not far away, beneath the calm water, strange silver lights flickered, drawing his attention. "What is that?" Harry blinked in confusion. The silver light seemed to sense his gaze and approached the boat swiftly. Within seconds, the light was upon them. The ship's side loomed just a few feet away. "Sirach fish?" Hermione's slightly surprised voice caught Harry's attention. "What's that?" Harry asked curiously, eyeing the spiny fish with interest. "A fish that lives in the Atlantic Ocean and possesses magical properties. There's a brief mention of it in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them," Hermione explained, her voice tinged with concern. "Be careful, Harry. They're aggressive. Ouch!" Without warning, more than a dozen Sirach fish leaped from the water, hovering in midair and launching sharp water arrows at them. Caught off guard, both Harry and Hermione were struck several times, their skin turning an alarming shade of purple. They finally understood why Professor Blaine had placed a magical barrier around the boat. "Hermione, take the rudder! We can't withstand this kind of attack for long," Harry shouted, helping Hermione to her feet. He scrambled to the stern, using both hands and feet. Without hesitation, he pressed his palms firmly on two wooden spheres, activating the magic barrier. The once stationary boat began to glide swiftly across the water. "But where are we going, Harry?" Hermione called out, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. The boat carved a graceful semicircular arc on the turbulent lake, but the relentless Sirach fish pursued them, their water arrows striking the white barrier and increasing the magic power needed to maintain it. "Any direction," Harry yelled, his hair whipped into a frenzy by the wind. I can't keep this up much longer. But Hermione hesitated, her eyes darting around anxiously. She steered the boat erratically, searching for anything that might guide them. Suddenly, through the misty clouds, an orange light appeared, catching her attention. In her panic, Hermione instinctively turned the rudder, steering the boat toward the flickering light. The appearance of the Siroc fish seemed to signal chaos, as screams of horror and cries of pain echoed from all directions in the staff lounge, which had been filled with oppressive silence. "Don't go there, Hermione!" Harry shouted, glancing back at the boat's direction. "Can't you see? Professor Blaine wants us to panic and lose our composure, so we'll be lured by the hinky-punk." "Oh, maybe you're right." Hermione swerved sharply, nearly throwing herself and Harry out of the cabin. "Harry, I'm not very good at this." Taking advantage of the cabin's inertia, Harry climbed to the bow in a few swift steps. Hermione, not wanting to take unnecessary risks, moved to the stern, her brows furrowed in concentration. She mimicked Harry's earlier actions, pressing her hands on the wooden spheres. "All right," Harry said, dodging a water arrow. The magic barrier reactivated. He gripped the rudder, taking a deep breath. "It's like a broomstick on water. I can handle that. Hold on tight, Hermione." As the youngest Quidditch seeker in a century, Harry's talent for maneuvering fast-moving vehicles was undeniable. At the same speed, Hermione struggled to evade the Siroc fish, but Harry, with a few deft turns and keen awareness of his surroundings, managed to outpace them. The clouds obscured his vision, making it easy to confuse the magical fish and leave them far behind. This time, however, Atticus Blaine and Hermione's oak boats were already very close to the orange orb of light nestled within the clouds. Hermione had previously speculated that a hinky-punk might reside there, and Harry instinctively felt a sense of unease. He quickly turned the rudder, eager to steer away from the area. Just then, from another direction, a much larger oak ship burst through the clouds and mist, suddenly appearing before Harry and Hermione. End of this chapter. Chapter 202. Games. The oak boat that came into view was about twice the size of the one Harry and Hermione were in. This was a special provision made by Professor Atticus Blaine to accommodate the considerable size of the two young wizards aboard, Crabbe and Goyle from Slytherin. Professor Blaine had mentioned earlier that this was a racing game, prompting Draco Malfoy to unceremoniously abandon his two loyal followers in favor of Miss Pansy Parkinson. Upon seeing them, Harry's expression darkened. He turned the rudder, attempting to steer away, but Hermione stopped him. "Wait, Harry. Look at their faces," Hermione said, blinking as she observed Crabbe and Goyle drifting slowly towards the orange light ball. She quickly realized they seemed to be bewitched by a hinky-punk. Indeed, despite their boat being twice the size of the others, Crabbe and Goyle filled the cabin to the brim, staring blankly at the glowing orb with vacant eyes. The orange light seemed oblivious to Harry and Hermione, who were nearby, as it guided the boat slowly forward. "It's not easy for these two big fools," Harry scoffed. "I guess they figured out how to make the boat move when their heads were burning and smoking. It turns out the hinky-punk took advantage of them and controlled their minds." "Don't say that, Harry," Hermione chided gently, her eyes filled with concern as she watched Crabbe and Goyle drift towards the vortex in the fog. "Should we warn them, do you think?" "Are you crazy, Hermione?" Harry exclaimed, eyes wide with surprise. "Those two won't appreciate our help. Besides, Professor Blaine wouldn't put the students in real danger. Just let them learn a lesson." Malfoy framed Hagrid and lied to avoid the game against Gryffindor. In my opinion, it's fitting for him to get a taste of his own medicine. After a moment of contemplation, Hermione nodded hesitantly. "Well, if you say so." Suddenly, a creature with horns, green teeth, and long fingers leaped from the light green mud beneath the calm water. It grabbed the side of the boat with one hand and Crabbe's collar with the other, seemingly intent on dragging him into the depths. "Relatio!" Hermione reacted instinctively, her wand already in hand. She aimed at the Grindylow, hitting the long, thin fingers clutching the boat's side with precision. With a splash, the Grindylow fell back into the water. Realizing who had thwarted its attack, it bared its teeth at Harry and Hermione, emitting a strange chirp. Looks like Professor Blaine has given us a preview of our Defense Against the Dark Arts final exam, Harry remarked, raising his eyebrows as he swiftly drew his wand, ready to defend. His nonchalance made Hermione a bit uneasy. Let me handle this, Harry. It's my problem. There's a spell I hope will scare it off, Hermione said, moving beside Harry. She swallowed nervously, twirled her slender wrist, and whispered, Wingardium Leviosa. With a clang, a brittle dead branch from the charred wood nearby snapped. Under Hermione's control, it sliced through the water with lightning speed, emitting a sharp scream. Waves surged on the previously calm surface, and a 10-foot-high wall of water rolled back, knocking the advancing Grindylow away. Grindylow. Atticus Blaine withdrew his gaze from Ron and Parvati, who were desperately dodging the water arrows shot by the Searock fish in the muddy waters. Floating in midair, he looked at Hermione with surprise and a soft smile. Very impressive, Miss Granger. Professor Blaine's object manipulation charm? Harry's blue eyes widened in shock as he stared at Hermione, exclaiming, When did you master that? Just recently, Hermione replied, pursing her lips with a coy smile, clearly pleased with Harry's admiration. Potter. As Harry and Hermione marveled at the spell's power and versatility, a wall of water, stirred by the fate curse, cascaded down. The surging waves caught up with Crabbe and Goyle's boat, jolting the two into awareness. In the oak cabin, the two, now drenched and bewildered, struggled to comprehend the situation. Their attention was soon drawn to Harry Potter, not far away. Sharing a gleeful glance, Goyle pointed at Harry with a silly grin. You're in trouble, Potter. Draco told us. Malfoy? Harry, standing 60 feet away, became alert. He eyed the two who had inadvertently escaped harm due to Hermione's mercy and demanded sharply, What did Malfoy tell you? Surprisingly, Crabbe and Goyle were craftier than Harry anticipated. They exchanged a malicious look. And in the next moment, one leaped toward the bow and the other toward the stern. Damn! Hermione hadn't realized the situation yet, but Harry, quick-witted, deduced Malfoy's plan. Go to the stern, Hermione, he shouted. I bet Malfoy instructed them to attack if they spotted our boat. But Harry, Hermione staggered back to the stern, channeling magic to propel the oak boat. Professor Blaine clearly said we can't attack each other. Professor Blaine only said we can't attack each other with wands, Hermione, Harry retorted. Ever since Professor Blaine had taught him a trick for dealing with the infernal corpse last school year, Harry had learned to heed his instincts. As he predicted, Crabbe and Goyle collided with each other in their oversized boat, which was twice the normal size. Given its mass, Harry and Hermione's boat was unlikely to withstand the impact. Clang! With just a slight touch, their boat rocked violently from side to side amidst Hermione's exclamation. If not for their preparedness, they might have been thrown out of the cabin. I thought their boat would be slow. Harry gritted his teeth. Professor Blaine probably enchanted their boat, ignoring weight and focusing solely on our magic power, Hermione screamed. In their efforts to evade the Searock earlier, both Harry and Hermione had expended a significant amount of magic. Meanwhile, Crabbe and Goyle, though not the brightest, still had enough magic to keep up with the average wizard. Their boat, driven by their ample magic reserves, sped towards them. Due to its excessive speed, Crabbe and Goyle's boat carved a huge arc on the water's surface. After a while, Harry and Hermione managed to stabilize their boat and veered in another direction. However, Crabbe and Goyle pursued them with grinning faces. These two fools have probably never experienced such a thrilling moment in their lives. Harry thought angrily, feeling as if he were riding a sweeping 7 stars, racing against a Nimbus 2000. He was being outpaced in a straight line, and he could. Atticus Blaine could only rely on constant and agile maneuvering to repeatedly evade Crabbe and Goyle's relentless attempts to collide with him. Hermione, let go of the hand you just grabbed, or we'll end up in the water feeding the fish, he urged. Oh no, Harry! Hermione exclaimed defiantly, her cheeks glistening with sweat. You said it yourself. Professor Blaine doesn't allow us to use magic to attack each other. Chapter 200, Celebration, and Chapter 203, Games. Sometimes, Hermione's stubbornness truly exasperated Harry and Ron. Take the issue with Scabbers, for instance. Despite the overwhelming evidence suggesting otherwise, Hermione remained adamant that Crookshanks had nothing to do with Scabbers' disappearance. Yet, she couldn't provide any proof to clear Crookshank's name. "All right, let me see what else I can do," Harry panted, his eyes scanning the surroundings, eager to assist his fellow Gryffindors or find something useful. Suddenly, his eyes brightened with an idea. "Aha! There's a way, Hermione, to make Malfoy's two lackeys pay." By this time, Hermione's face was pale, her cheeks glistening with sweat. The exertion of magic and Harry's rapid maneuvers had left her dizzy. Even after shaking off Crabbe and Goyle, she couldn't muster a smile, only managing a nod despite feeling nauseous. "Hey, you two!" Harry, inspired, seemed to channel the intensity of a thrilling Quidditch match. He deftly adjusted his position, sending misleading signals, and cornered Crabbe and Goyle like a cunning seeker. Finally, after half a minute, satisfied with the boat's positions on the choppy water, he taunted, "Can't you be smarter? Without Malfoy, you two are like mindless trolls." "How dare you, Potter?" Crabbe shouted, enraged. "You're nothing but a piece of trash." Crabbe and Goyle, resembling two small trolls, focused solely on Harry's mocking grin, oblivious to their surroundings. "Speed up, Hermione!" Harry's heart raced as he saw the two approaching. He gripped the rudder tightly, urging Hermione to channel all her magic into the oak boat beneath them. Instantly, the boat surged forward like a car with the pedal to the metal, crashing through a mist hovering over the water. The familiar rush of wind in his ears reminded Harry of the joy he flying his beloved Nimbus 2000. Despite the thrill, the gap between the two speeding boats closed rapidly, threatening an imminent collision. "Harry!" Hermione, clinging to the stern, called out nervously as the shadow loomed closer. "Hold on, Hermione!" Harry suddenly crouched and jerked the rudder, causing the boat to leap across the water and air like a skipping stone. Initially, Crabbe and Goyle dismissed it as another of Potter's tricks. But as they turned and their boat drifted uncontrollably, they realized something was amiss. They were heading straight for the quagmire where the Hinkypunk, which had previously ensnared them, resided. The fierce wind swept away the peculiar smoke, revealing a swirling vortex about 20 feet wide in Crabbe and Goyle's terrified eyes. The Hinkypunk, no larger than a house elf, flickered between reality and illusion like a wisp of silk. Holding its flickering wild wisp, it stared blankly at the approaching boat, unable to react before being knocked senseless. The vortex, guarded by the Hinkypunk, possessed a powerful suction due to the presence of a lemora fish, a creature commonly found in the Indian Ocean. Known for its strong magical properties, magicians often used lemora fish as anchor chains to secure ships. Unfortunately for Crabbe and Goyle, they were about to learn this the hard way. The sudden halt of the ship was catastrophic for them, given the immense inertia. Amidst the ear-splitting screams, the two figures soared through the air, tracing a graceful arc before crashing into the water with the force of depth charges. Witnessing this comical scene, Harry, who was struggling to stop not far away, burst into laughter. Even Hermione, despite her drooping eyelids and lack of energy, couldn't help but let a smile tug at the corners of her mouth. But was the misfortune of Crabbe and Goyle truly over? Just as Crabbe and Goyle, disheveled and disoriented, began to regain their composure, a large school of Shirak fish appeared from nowhere. They swarmed around the pair, relentlessly spraying them with water arrows. Crabbe and Goyle screamed in pain, and this time, even Hermione couldn't muster any sympathy for them. "Congratulations to everyone who successfully acted. I passed the first round of screening." A familiar voice suddenly echoed across the vast lake. "Now, the remaining warriors will compete for the glory of victory on the track." "It's Professor Blaine's voice," Harry exclaimed, helping Hermione to her feet. Before he could ponder the meaning of Professor Blaine's words, the space around him began to churn like boiling water. Suddenly, Harry felt a sensation of being lifted skyward as the earth rapidly receded from the horizon. As his vision cleared, Harry's expression darkened as he surveyed the scene where the illusion had dissipated. 300 feet away, the battered Ron and Parvati were using an oak boat, stuck vertically in the mud, as a shield against the water arrows from a group of Shirak fish. Lavender and Seamus, utterly exhausted, leaned against the side of the boat, seemingly resigned to their fate, unmoving. Many of their Gryffindor classmates found themselves in similar predicaments. Only Neville and Dean appeared to be in a state akin to Harry and Hermione. As for the Slytherins, Harry cast a quick glance at Malfoy and Parkinson, who were laughing at the two Gryffindors he'd sent into the mud. The tall and sturdy Millicent Bulstrode, who harbored a grudge against Hermione, was glaring coldly in her direction. Behind her, Theodore Nott stood silently, as if he hadn't expended much energy. Additionally, there was another Slytherin pair, the pretty Daphne Greengrass and her teammate Blaise Zabini, who were quietly discussing the current situation, both appearing equally energetic. It had to be acknowledged that in such a game, where no prior information was given, the Slytherins, with their tact and caution, held an advantage over the Gryffindors. 3 against 2, our magic power is more depleted. As a Quidditch master, Harry was adept at analyzing game situations. With just a few glances, he could already foresee what was likely to unfold. End of this chapter. Chapter 204, The Game. The transformation of the surrounding area was far from complete. The clouds and mist hovering over the expansive lake swiftly coalesced under the influence of magic, forming 2 fog walls, each stretching a mile long. Between these walls lay the final competition track. Injured young wizards who had lost the ability to compete were gently lifted from the cabins or the water, floating back to the classroom's doorstep. Meanwhile, the remaining 5 boats returned to the embankment, aligning themselves in a neat row. Professor Blaine, who had been absent until now, appeared suddenly, facing the disappointed eyes of the young wizards with a smile. "So, it's much clearer what needs to be done next, isn't it?" he said, gesturing towards the track outlined by the fog walls. Atticus Blaine continued cheerfully. "There are 3 groups of Slytherins and 2 groups of Gryffindors. You will now race with all your might to reach the other side. Along the track, you'll encounter some of the delightful creatures you've just seen. At the end, there will be a fork. One path leads to glory, the other to failure. Only by making the right choice can you achieve ultimate victory." "If I were you, Potter," Malfoy sneered after Professor Blaine explained the rules, "I'd take that old broom and head to the owl shed to sweep bird droppings right now. You know, to avoid embarrassing yourself." For the first time, Harry didn't immediately respond to Malfoy's taunt. Supporting the exhausted and trembling Hermione, he glanced at the Slytherins, who seemed to have reached a consensus, and then, panting, he retorted sarcastically, "I'm really surprised, Malfoy. I thought your loyal followers were just those 2 big oafs." "There's no need to try to sow discord, Potter," came an unexpected voice. It was Theodore Nott, a thin boy on Millicent Bulstrode's boat, who seemed somewhat detached from the other Slytherins. Harry hadn't paid much attention to him before. Nott spoke sullenly. "Longbottom poses no threat to us, Potter. As long as you fall into the water, Slytherin will win, and if we defeat you in tomorrow's Quidditch match, Gryffindor won't stand a chance against Hufflepuff. It's a win-win for us." Nott's words sparked an immediate and fierce reaction from the young Gryffindor wizards on the shore. Ron shouted "despicable" and tried to charge at Nott, but was held back by Atticus Blaine's stern gaze. "Not bad, young man," Atticus thought, his eyes betraying a hint of admiration. Most descendants of these ancient pure-blood wizard families were often spoiled brats, but occasionally a few stood out, honed by elite education. Harry pursed his lips tightly. He had suspected Malfoy's group harbored such intentions, but he was still taken aback by Nott's candidness. "What should we do, Harry?" Neville, drenched and bewildered, asked. "There's only one way, Harry," Hermione whispered, her face still pale. "You have to leave me behind." Harry opened his mouth to protest, but Hermione cut him off. "If you want to win, Harry, you must do this. And Dean," she turned to Dean, whose dark skin had paled, "you too must withdraw. We're both in no condition to continue. Staying will only hold you back." Harry, Neville, and Dean understood Hermione's point. Instead of keeping 2 incapacitated teammates, it was wiser to merge their efforts into a single, combat-ready team. This way they might find a chance for victory amidst the looming challenges. Slytherin. "A very wise choice, Miss Granger." Atticus Blaine nodded appreciatively at Hermione before turning his attention to the young wizards who were stumbling around. With a smile, he said, "Please wait a moment, everyone. I'll send you all to the hospital together later." The little wizards exchanged glances, black lines metaphorically appearing on their foreheads, wondering if he was speaking in riddles. "Ha! I'll be waiting for you at the finish line, Potter." I hope you can swim faster." Malfoy taunted with a triumphant laugh as Atticus announced the start of the Mac. H. As Harry had anticipated, Malfoy had no intention of confronting him directly. Instead, he delegated this honorable task to Crabbe, Goyle, and Greengrass. "Show Malfoy what you're made of, Harry," Ron shouted from the bank, his face smeared with mud. "If you can't do it, don't even think about going to bed tonight." His words hung in the air, drawing astonished looks from everyone, including Atticus and Hermione. "Oh, what's the matter?" Ron stammered, feeling the weight of their stares. He glanced innocently at Hermione, who was trying to suppress her laughter, and muttered, I share a dorm with Harry. Nothing else." Neville's chubby cheeks flushed with embarrassment, somehow becoming the unexpected hope of the group. The pressure was palpable, and if not for Harry's presence, he might have crumbled. "What should we do, Harry?" he asked nervously. After Malfoy departed, Greengrass and Crabbe didn't rush forward. Instead, they positioned themselves between Harry and Neville, clearly intent on hindering them to secure Malfoy's victory. "You can't give up, Neville," Harry urged through gritted teeth. Suddenly, the wind howled, and their stationary boat shot forward like an arrow. Harry fixed his gaze on Malfoy's rapidly retreating figure, determination burning in his eyes. "Get out of the way, Harry!" Neville and several anxious Gryffindors on the shore shouted in unison. Harry turned his head just in time to see Millicent's sneer and Daphne's calm eyes as they maneuvered their boat to collide with his, forming an X trajectory. With a loud crack, the bow of Harry's boat tilted high like a pirate ship. If he hadn't been gripping the rudder, he would have been thrown into the water. Neville fared worse, sliding uncontrollably in the cabin. His face met the hull with a painful thud, and by the time Harry regained control, Neville's nose was bleeding profusely. Gryffindor's angry shouts echoed from the shore, nearly shaking the roof. Hermione rushed to Professor Blaine, her voice filled with rare indignation. "It's not fair. Slytherins are cheating, using despicable means to win. Is this allowed, Professor?" "I don't see anything wrong, Miss Granger," Atticus replied calmly to the little witch's accusations. "Just as you and Mr. Thomas chose to withdraw to ensure Harry and Neville could form a team, Slytherin has chosen a tactic that favors their victory. I find their choice quite wise." Hermione's cheeks flushed with frustration, and she struggled to find words to refute him. However, since Professor Blaine had only prohibited the use of wands for attacks, Millicent and Greengrass's actions were technically not against the rules. "How are you, Neville?" Harry asked urgently, as the boat's bow slammed into the water repeatedly before finally stabilizing. He turned to check on Neville, who was particularly. Neville, usually easily frightened, must have been terrified, but surprisingly, he seemed braver than expected. "I'm fine, Harry," Neville said, still in shock. He wiped his nose and stared blankly at the bright red blood on his hands. Without saying another word, he wiped his hands on his robes under Harry's concerned gaze, then took a deep breath and looked at the two groups blocking the path with their boats. Millicent and Daphne, the two Slytherin girls, had been watching Harry intently from the start. Meanwhile, the two wizards, Theodore and Blaise, who stood silently behind them, frowned in unison. It was as if they sensed something unsettling about the soft, chubby-faced boy who was looking back at them. "You don't have to look for trouble, Potter and Longbottom," Blaise Zabini said. "It would be more sensible to give up now." "Sorry," Harry replied, his green eyes blazing with determination as he glared coldly at the Slytherins blocking the track. "I'll probably never understand what it's like to judge the situation." Chapter 205, The Ultimate Winner. "Stupid Gryffindor, what else can you do, Potter?" "There's nothing you can do," Blaise Zabini sneered, his brown eyes filled with undisguised contempt as Harry's words drew applause from the young Gryffindor wizards. The river wasn't particularly wide, and two swaying oak boats blocked the way, leaving only a narrow space insufficient for another boat to pass. In the distance, Draco's speed had slowed, not only because Parkinson's magic couldn't sustain high speed throughout the track, but also due to the Hinkypunks hidden in the mist, which randomly disrupted their progress. Moreover, in the second half of the track, the Shirok fish, conjured by Professor Blaine, constantly attacked them. To avoid being hit by the weakly toxic water arrows, they needed to maintain a magic barrier, further depleting their magic reserves. Harry turned his gaze away without a word, meeting the Slytherins blocking his path with equally sharp eyes. At some point, Atticus Blaine had procured a high-backed soft chair. He sat with his legs crossed, sipping a cup of steaming green tea, watching the unfolding scene with leisurely interest. What would Harry do? Not only the young wizards behind him, but Atticus was also curious. As everyone speculated whether Harry would charge forward, risking a fall into the water to challenge Slytherin's arrogance, he slowly drew his wand from his pocket and pointed it steadily at Daphne and the others. "You want to attack us, Potter?" Theodore Nott mocked, a smirk playing on his lips. "You haven't forgotten Professor Blaine's rules, have you?" "Neville!" Harry suddenly shouted, cutting through Theodore's taunt. Though silent, Neville at the stern was ready. At Harry's call, he slapped his palm on the hemisphere on the starboard side without hesitation. Their boat, like a sharp ice knife, sliced through the water, sending up billowing white waves. It charged straight toward Millicent's and Theodore's boat, seemingly prepared for a one-for-one exchange. But then, the ground is freezing, and the sky is freezing. Harry's wand suddenly lowered, pointing at the water as he shouted. A gust of icy air flowed out, and a layer of hard ice formed on the rippling water. With a flick of his wrist, the ice spread upwards, creating a ramp. Time seemed to stretch at that moment. The four Slytherin wizards slowly raised their heads, their astonished and comical expressions reflected in the crystal-clear beads scattered in mid-air, as if in a dream. Boom! The boat crashed back into the water with a thunderous noise, and time resumed. Ron and Hermione on the shore immediately cheered. "Nice job, Harry!" Ron shouted, and the other Gryffindor wizards, a bit slower to react, laughed joyously, as if under a happiness spell. In stark contrast, the Slytherin wizards fell from smugness into shock. Crabbe and Goyle, covered in mud, seemed ready to rush over and toss Ron into the water, but a slightly cold look from the prophetic Atticus Blaine held them back. Harry and Neville sped away, and only 3 seconds later did the two Slytherin boats realize what had happened, turning around to chase them desperately. When focused, the naturally growing hinkypunks were not easily misled, not only for Harry and Neville, but also for the obstacles and challenges ahead. The quagmire set by Atticus Blaine did not pose much trouble for Millicent and Daphne. Their speedboat glided nimbly across the water, and it wasn't long before they had completed a third of the course. Just as the 6 young wizards began to feel a bit fatigued, the Harek fish emerged to cause more mischief. From beneath the light green surface of the water, several water arrows unexpectedly struck Harry's cheeks. Startled, Harry, who had been focused on Malfoy's gradually approaching figure, jerked the steering wheel, nearly colliding with a jumping orange light near the riverbank. Boo, boo, boo! The water arrows intertwined continuously, enveloping Harry and Neville like a large transparent net. Neville crouched in the cabin, safe from the Sirach fish's attacks due to his position. However, Harry wasn't as fortunate. To maintain a clear view, he had to maneuver the boat frantically, but even so, a stray water arrow struck the corner of his eyebrow, causing him to momentarily lose consciousness and leaving his forehead swollen. "Harry, should we activate the barrier?" Neville asked, noticing the ship's erratic movements and Harry's distressed state. "No, Neville," Harry replied firmly, despite his impaired vision. "Our magic power is too precious. We can't afford to waste it on protection." Neville blinked, clearly moved by Harry's resolve. In contrast, the two Slytherin boats lacked the same determination. Millicent and Daphne, concerned about their appearance, decided to activate their magic barrier to fend off the sharp water arrows. This decision meant that Theodore and Blaze's magic would deplete at twice the rate, causing them to fall behind, even with the Sirach fish's assistance, unable to catch up with Harry and Neville. For the Slytherin boats, there was only one option left, to aid Malfoy by hindering Potter and Longbottom. Millicent and Daphne exchanged a knowing glance, both arriving at the same conclusion. Clang! In an instant, the 3 parallel oak boats collided. Under Harry's furious gaze, Millicent's plump jaw quivered as she taunted, "We won't let you have an easy victory, Potter." "What are these despicable people up to now?" Ron shouted, while Hermione remained silent, her expression grim, having already deduced Millicent and Daphne's intentions. Their actions were indeed aimed at eliminating Potter from the race. Atticus Blaine sipped his bitter tea, maintaining a calm demeanor, though inwardly amused. "What on earth are you trying to do?" Harry demanded, his face pale with anger as he struggled to control the rudder. "Isn't it obvious, Potter?" Blaise replied smugly. "There can only be one winner, and that's Slytherin. Watch out, Harry. There are traps ahead." Neville's warning made Harry realize Blaise's true intentions. To ensure Malfoy's victory, they intended to take down Gryffindor's only boat with them. As expected, Millicent and Daphne, flanking Harry and Neville's boat, forced them into a cloud of mist, all three boats crashing into the quagmire with a resounding splash. The sudden halt left all 6 participants in a precarious situation. The board threatened to tip over, but fortunately, they had anticipated this, and none of them were thrown into the water. Despair hung heavily in the silence. Seeing Harry and Neville, who were desperately striving to bring glory to Gryffindor, Hermione burst into tears among her ashen-faced classmates. Ron stood with his mouth half open, struggling to process the situation. Harry, standing dumbfounded in the cabin, couldn't accept the reality. He glanced at Hermione, who was sobbing beside him, and awkwardly raised his hand to pat her shoulder in comfort. "Professor Blaine!" The young Slytherin wizards struggled to contain their excitement, and Crabbe laughed foolishly. "You can declare Draco the victor." "Not necessarily, Mr. Crabbe," Atticus Blaine replied, holding his teacup with an unperturbed smile. "Perhaps there is no winner yet, Longbottom?" End of this chapter. Chapter 206, The Ultimate Winner. Atticus Blaine rose from the oak boat, which was stuck in the mire. A water arrow had struck the corner of his eye, leaving it swollen and nearly impossible to see through, yet he stood up, panting. His eyes blazed with fury as he faced the 4 Slytherins. Their smug expressions only fueled the anger boiling within him, threatening to burst from his chest. "There's no point in glaring at us like that, Potter," Blaise said, wiping water droplets from his face. A smirk played at the corner of his mouth. "Isn't the essence of the game to win by any means necessary?" "Ha!" Atticus laughed bitterly. "That's typical of Slytherin, just like your Quidditch team, cowardly cowards who exploit every loophole for a small advantage. The game of Fendo." "You can say whatever you like, Potter," Millicent, towering over Atticus, replied dismissively. "You've already lost this contest. By the end of the school year, you'll see Slytherin claim the Quidditch trophy for the 8th consecutive time. I'm looking forward to seeing your face then." Atticus was about to retort when Neville's voice cut through the tension, startling everyone stranded on the track. "We haven't lost." Determination shone on Neville's round face, and Atticus was taken aback. It was the first time he had seen Neville stand firm against the domineering gazes of the pure-blood Slytherins. "We haven't lost, Atticus," Neville repeated, his wet hair plastered comically to his forehead. Yet no one could ignore the resolve in his eyes. "Are you delusional, Longbottom?" Daphne sneered. "Or have you been hit too hard? Can't you see we're all stuck in the quagmire? We can't get out, but Slytherin, Draco, and Pansy can." Before Daphne could finish her taunt, Neville sprang into action. He turned and lunged at the hemisphere at the stern of the boat, slapping it with his palm after a low growl. The hull trembled violently, as if it wanted to surge forward. But then, under the astonished gazes of the Slytherins, it stalled again, motionless. "If you were trying to scare us," Daphne said, feigning shock as she patted her chest, "you succeeded, Longbottom. We were shocked." Amidst the laughter of the remaining Slytherins, Daphne glared at Neville with disdain. "Look at your stupidity, Longbottom. It's a stain on your blood. I heard something interesting about your foolish parents." "You are not allowed to insult my parents," Neville roared, cutting her off. As the Slytherins began to mock Neville, Atticus's hand instinctively gripped his wand. He hesitated, torn between obeying Professor Blaine's orders and defending his friend. But when Daphne mentioned Neville's parents, Atticus's wand was already raised, his anger extinguishing any fear of punishment. He was ready to teach these Slytherins a lesson. However, Neville's roar stopped him in his tracks. The ear-piercing screech and the sudden movement of the cabin made Atticus forget his intention to retaliate. He turned to the stern in amazement. Neville, drenched and steaming, stood with his forehead bruised and veins bulging. He let out a roar like a lion, and the sharpness in his eyes made Atticus question if he had misjudged him. The boat moved. Neville had broken free from the magical grip of the Lamora fish lurking in the quagmire with a burst of magic power. Boom! After the thunderous crash, a few unexpected splashes echoed as bodies hit the water. Harry and Neville, racing at breakneck speed, left the Slytherins, who had just emerged from the water, utterly speechless. Yo-hoo! Beautiful job! The sudden eruption of cheers from the young Gryffindor wizards nearly lifted the roof off. The sight of the Slytherins' faces, as if they had seen a ghost, filled their hearts with uncontainable joy. But how did they do it? Previously, some young Gryffindors had attempted similar feats when stuck in the quagmire, but they couldn't even budge the boat, let alone break free. This is called explosive seed. Atticus Blaine leaned back in his chair, answering the unspoken question with a knowing smile. Harry, equally baffled by Neville's astonishing performance, had no idea how Neville managed it, but now was not the time to dwell on it. With Gryffindor having another shot at victory, Harry's eyes gleamed with determination. He resolved to seize the opportunity, no matter what. As Harry and Neville managed to overtake Blaise and the others halfway through the race, Malfoy and Pansy were nearing the fork in the Y-shaped track. A correct choice here would easily secure their victory. What happened to that Longbottom? Malfoy muttered, knowing that only by winning could he truly taunt Potter. He and Pansy had been relentless, eager to defeat Gryffindor as swiftly as possible. The commotion was too significant for Malfoy and Pansy to ignore. When Millicent and Daphne forced Potter's boat into the quagmire, Malfoy and Parkinson, resting on their oak boat, took the opportunity to regain their strength. Seeing this, they relaxed, believing the outcome was decided. However, what happened next reignited their sense of urgency. Even from half a mile away, Malfoy could sense the determination of the boat surging through the white water, racing forward. "Hurry up, Pansy," Malfoy shouted, suddenly alert, urging Pansy to muster the last of their magical energy. But Draco, Pansy Parkinson's usually sharp demeanor softened when she faced Draco. She brushed aside her sweat-dampened bangs, which had fallen over her eyes, and though her body trembled slightly, she turned her gaze to the fork without uttering a word of complaint. "Which way should we go?" Both paths were cloaked in a hazy mist. To the left, 5 or 6 flickering orange lights glimmered, while only one shone on the right. It was clearly suspicious, and anyone with a clear mind would recognize the trap. Yet, as Malfoy's eyes fixed on the brighter orange light in the mist on the right, his breath caught. The world blurred into indistinct light and shadow. Malfoy felt dizzy, realizing something was amiss. Instinctively, he wanted to steer left, but an inexplicable force seemed to control his body. After a silent whimper, Malfoy, with a vacant expression, suddenly jerked the rudder to the right, plunging into the clouded wall without a sound. Author's note: apologies for the delay in Chapter 2. I'm still writing, and will update it during the day tomorrow. End of this chapter. But the urgency of the situation overpowered his disdain. He quickly turned to Neville, who was still trembling but resolute. "Neville, we have to help them," Harry said, his voice firm despite the chaos. Neville nodded, his face pale but determined. "Right, let's do it," he replied, gripping his wand tightly. As the fog continued to swirl ominously, Harry and Neville maneuvered their boat closer to the struggling figures of Malfoy and Parkinson. The water was churning violently, and the air was thick with tension. Harry's heart pounded in his chest as he extended his hand towards Malfoy, who was now within reach. "Grab on!" Harry shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the water. Malfoy, his face a mask of fear and desperation, reached out and clutched Harry's hand with all his strength. With a mighty heave, Harry and Neville managed to pull him onto their boat, followed closely by Parkinson, who was sobbing uncontrollably. "Thank you," Malfoy gasped, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine gratitude. Harry nodded curtly, his mind racing. "What was it? What did you see?" he demanded, glancing nervously at the fog that still loomed ominously behind them. "It was huge," Malfoy stammered, shivering from the cold and fear. "I don't know what it was, but it was definitely not an inferi. It was something much worse." Parkinson, still shaking, added, "It came out of nowhere, and it was so fast. We didn't stand a chance." Harry exchanged a worried look with Neville. Whatever was lurking in the fog was clearly dangerous, and they needed to get out of there fast. "Let's get back to the others," Harry said decisively, taking the rudder and steering the boat away from the fog. "We need to warn them." As they navigated the treacherous waters, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The mysterious creature in the fog was a threat they couldn't ignore, and he knew they would have to face it sooner or later. But for now, their priority was to regroup and figure out their next move. With Malfoy and Parkinson safe on board, Harry and Neville focused on getting back to the main track, their minds already working on a plan to deal with the unknown menace that lurked in the mist. Thinking of Professor Blaine's unrestrained style, Atticus Blaine found himself somewhat inclined to believe their nonsense. In that moment of hesitation, the monster emerged from the mist, stepping out of the water. As its face became clear, Harry and Neville gasped, their scalps tingling with fear. Up to this point, Harry had encountered 3 of the most terrifying creatures: Hagrid's 3-headed dog in his first year, Professor Blaine's reanimated corpse in his second year, and the Dementors on the Hogwarts Express at the start of his third year. Now, another creature joined the ranks of those that frightened him. Its grim eyes were filled with dead silence, and its ferocious claws and teeth were terrifying enough. However, what truly frightened Harry was the black aura surrounding the creature, exuding sheer malice and a power akin to death. Harry, feeling cold and stiff, heard a strange sound. After a moment, he realized it was the sound of Neville's teeth chattering. The creature, a Hinklepunk brought from Avalon Island by Atticus Blaine, had been corrupted by dark magic. It shook the orange tentacles on its head, bared its teeth, and spewed foul-smelling black smoke. Like the 8-eyed spider that Atticus had kept imprisoned under the dormitory floor for years, this Hinklepunk, confined in a glass bottle for half a year, could no longer restrain its bloodthirsty desire. It wanted to kill. In a panic, Malfoy and Parkinson scrambled into Harry's small boat. Originally meant for 2, the cabin became cramped with 4 young wizards standing shoulder to shoulder. "What are you standing around for, Potter?" Malfoy shouted. "Waiting for that monster to tear us to shreds? Hurry up and sail." "If you don't show some gratitude, Malfoy," Harry retorted, blinking as he regained his composure. His face turned sec, old at Malfoy's commanding tone. "Then please leave me and Neville." "Oops!" Suddenly, the world tilted sharply, and Harry and Neville found themselves plunging into the cold water. Pansy Parkinson had pushed them overboard. "Sail away, Malfoy. We now know which way is right," Pansy exclaimed, stepping to the stern and gently nudging Malfoy toward the bow. "Who made you do this, Pansy?" Malfoy asked, astonished. He glanced at Longbottom and Potter, who were struggling to stay afloat, bewildered that Pansy would act without his command. "Don't just stand there, Draco," Pansy urged, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of her actions. "That monster will teach Potter and Longbottom a lesson for us. We need to leave quickly to avoid getting caught up in it." Malfoy pursed his lips, his astonishment giving way to cold anger. He looked away from Pansy and focused on Potter, who was helping Longbottom in the water. After a brief hesitation, he crouched down and extended his hand to them. Harry and Neville were confused. What was going on with the Slytherins? Pansy had pushed them into the water, yet Malfoy was trying to pull them back into the boat? "Don't get me wrong, Potter," Malfoy said, blushing under Harry's puzzled gaze. "It's still about Professor Blaine's practical class last time." End of this chapter. Chapter 208, The Final Winner. Professor Blaine's favor for the last practice class? Harry hurriedly helped Neville to his feet. Neville was struggling to pull his foot out of the mud, and Harry had already picked up his wand, ready to strike first. He found Malfoy's behavior despicable and didn't feel the need to abide by Professor Blaine's rules. However, Malfoy, who was leaning over the side of the boat with an outstretched hand, left Harry momentarily confused. It took him 2 or 3 seconds to comprehend Malfoy's unexpected gesture. It was strange. Could Malfoy, of all people, actually have a sense of decency and reciprocity? The thought seemed absurd. "Are you crazy, Draco?" Pansy exclaimed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "That's Potter. Have you lost your mind?" "Shut up, Pansy. I don't need you to tell me what to do," Draco snapped, glaring at her before turning back to Harry. His tone was irritable. "Hurry up, Potter. Get on board before I change my mind. Harry was skeptical. He couldn't believe Malfoy was acting out of kindness, but the Hinklepunk emerging from the mist wouldn't wait for them to sort it out. Silently, it had crept to within 20 feet of Harry and Neville. On the island of Avalon, among the powerful undead creatures, a Hinklepunk might only serve as bait. But in the outside world, it was a genuinely dangerous creature, corrupted by dark magic. On the mist-laden river, a Hinklepunk, walking on water with its strong single foot, let out a shrill neigh. Black smoke billowed from its body, and when it reappeared, it had raised its 5-inch sharp claws, poised behind Harry. The chilling wind hadn't yet reached him, but Harry felt a cold shiver rise from his tailbone, racing up to the back of his head. Time seemed to slow. He saw Malfoy's face, close and distorted with fear, and Parkinson, who was at the rudder, let go and rushed toward the power unit at the stern. At the classroom door, the little wizards, caught off guard, were stunned. Hermione unconsciously grabbed Ron's arm, her pure yellow eyes filled with despair. Ron, whose arm was turning bruised and purple from her grip, forgot to cry out in pain. His mouth hung open, unable to react as the tragedy unfolded. Atticus Blaine raised his brows, ready to activate the restriction magic engraved on the Hinklepunk. But what happened next made him pause, his raised fingers hesitating as he decided to observe the situation first. "Get out of the way, Harry!" At the critical moment, Neville, moving clumsily, reacted first. With a loud roar, he shoved Harry into the water. Malfoy, retreating instinctively, fell into the cabin. Pansy, rushing to the stern, pressed one hand on the power unit and used her wand with the other to control the rudder. Ignoring Malfoy's protests, the boat swiftly turned and sped toward the left track. The sharp claws grazed Neville's back, sending a few strands of fabric floating into the air, filling it with an unspeakable tension. Neville. Harry, submerged, sprang up the moment he hit the bottom. He screamed, wrapping his left arm around Neville's neck to drag him back, while his right hand swung his wand. The red light of the disarming charm shot toward the Hinklepunk's sharp claws. However, the Hinklepunk was agile, twisting to evade Harry's spell and reappearing in another spot. Interrupted with a shout, his voice echoing across the icy expanse. Harry spun around just in time to see the Hinklepunk lunging at him, its grotesque mouth wide open, ready to strike. Instinctively, Harry raised his wand, his mind racing for a spell that could save him. "Expelliarmus!" he shouted, hoping to at least disrupt the creature's attack. The spell shot out, a flash of red light that narrowly missed the Hinklepunk, but managed to throw it off balance for a moment. It was enough time for Harry to regain his footing and pull Neville up from the ice. "Thanks, Neville," Harry panted, his heart pounding in his chest. "We need to think of something fast." Neville nodded, his face pale but determined. "We can't keep you missing. We need to work together like Hermione taught us." Harry nodded, his mind racing. "Right. On 3, we both cast the stunning spell. Maybe if we hit it at the same time, it'll be enough." They both took a deep breath, their wands poised and ready. 1, 2, 3, stupefy, they shouted in unison, their voices strong and clear. Twin jets of red light shot from their wands, converging on the Hinklepunk. This time, the creature couldn't dodge both spells. The combined force of their magic struck it squarely, and with a shriek, it was thrown back, landing with a splash in the icy water. For a moment, the only sound was their heavy breathing and the gentle lapping of water against the ice. Then, slowly, the Hinklepunk sank beneath the surface, its form disappearing into the depths. "We did it," Neville said, his voice a mix of disbelief and relief. Harry nodded, a small smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Yeah, we did." As they stood there, catching their breath, Harry glanced back towards the embankment. Professor Atticus Blaine was still there, watching them with an inscrutable expression. Harry couldn't tell if he was pleased or merely indifferent, but he knew one thing for sure. They had faced a real danger and come out stronger for it. "Let's get out of here," Harry said, clapping Neville on the shoulder. Together, they made their way back across the ice, their steps more confident now, knowing they had faced the darkness and prevailed. Atticus Blaine pulled Harry aside. Before he could withdraw his hand, the monster's sharp claws slashed across his arm, sending a spray of crimson blood into the air. The intense pain twisted Neville's round cheeks into a grimace. From his vantage point on the embankment, Atticus Blaine frowned. He glanced at Malfoy and Parkinson, who were trapped in another river due to their reckless haste, and then turned his attention to the exhausted Potter and Longbottom, who had been relentlessly tormented. With a helpless curl of his lips, he prepared to intervene, lifting his right foot to leap into action. Just then, under Atticus's surprised gaze, Neville, despite his injured arm, let out a roar. He suddenly lunged forward, wrapping his arms around the thick leg of the Hinkpunk, and with a mighty effort flipped the creature over. "Come on, Harry!" Neville shouted, pinning the Hinkpunk to the ground. He gripped the monster's ferocious head with both hands, refusing to let go, even as the curling black smoke made him dizzy. Urgently, he called out to Harry. Harry was momentarily stunned by Neville's unexpected bravery, but quickly realized this was a rare opportunity. Determined not to let it slip away, he scrambled forward with the urgency of a first-year student. With a swift motion, Harry thrust his wand into the Hinkpunk's narrow nostril. The creature roared in agony, its violent thrashing sending Neville flying. Yet Harry, seizing the moment, refused to let the chance go to waste. A flurry of spells flashed through his mind, and suddenly Professor Blaine's instructions came to him. Taking a deep breath, Harry shouted with determination, "Burning flames!" The brilliance of that moment defied description. Before the violent explosion could unleash its fury, it was swallowed by a black hole that appeared out of nowhere. However, the shockwave from the near roar was enough to render Harry unconscious. In an instant, Atticus appeared behind Harry and lifted him up. Surveying Harry's scorched face and Neville, who was floating dazedly on the water, Atticus raised his shoulders in exasperation, a dark line of frustration crossing his face. "Hand-to-hand combat is still addictive, isn't it?" he remarked wryly. End of this chapter. Chapter 209, Cherish Click. In an instant, a dazzling bolt of lightning sliced through the sky like a sharp sword, its cold light tearing apart the darkness that enveloped the world. A fierce wind swept down, and the surging waves roared, crashing against the cliffs. The ground trembled, and even Hogwarts Castle, perched high on the cliff, shivered slightly. On the edge of the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid braved the storm, clutching his little red umbrella as he rushed into the dark woods. In such treacherous weather, not only the centaurs, but also the Aragog tribe and magical creatures like unicorns might need his assistance. "Oh, terrible! Haven't seen such a storm in years," he muttered. Inside the castle foyer, Professor Sprout clutched her tattered hat tightly with both hands and dashed into the thunderstorm without hesitation. She was determined to protect her greenhouse from the relentless wind and rain. Though the world outside was shrouded in darkness, Hogwarts Castle stood firm. The school hospital, however, was bustling with activity, thanks to Atticus Blaine's recent actions. "I don't recall ever offending you, Atticus," Madame Pomfrey exclaimed as she roughly applied white cream to Ron's back. She hurriedly moved towards the girls' area, separated by a curtain, casting a stern glance at Atticus, who was loitering nearby as if he were merely observing the scene. "Your words are too harsh, ma'am," Atticus replied, rubbing his nose in embarrassment. He wanted to explain his actions, but Madame Pomfrey, preoccupied with tending to the students, had no time for conversation. She swiftly pulled back the curtain and entered the girls' area. Oliver Wood, having heard the news, stood by Harry's hospital bed. Harry, now awake, had his face wrapped in gauze, and Wood looked at him with despair. "Is there any chance, Professor?" Wood turned to Professor Blaine, pleading, "Since Malfoy can talk about his arm, is it possible for the Gryffindor team to play at another time?" Harry, unable to speak due to the gauze, nodded desperately. "Oh, sorry, Mr. Wood," Atticus said with a regretful pout. "You'll have to ask Professor McGonagall. It's not up to me." With an innocent expression, Atticus seemed oblivious to the chaos he had caused. For a moment, the tearful Harry even suspected that Professor Blaine had deliberately stirred up trouble before the Quidditch match. "Tell me, Atticus." The sharp, hurried footsteps of Professor McGonagall cut through the chatter of the students gathered outside the school hospital. With no classes in the afternoon and the heavy rain preventing outdoor activities, they had come to witness the commotion. The crowd parted as Professor McGonagall approached, her lips pressed tightly together. She glared at Atticus with eyes that seemed to bore into him. How many galleons did Severus give you to sabotage Gryffindor's seeker? Cough! Cough! How did you know about our private dealings, Professor McGonagall? Atticus thought, but he quickly composed himself. Don't worry, Professor, he said with a smile. Most of the students only suffered minor injuries. After applying some white cream, they'll be back on their feet in no time. However, Mr. Longbottom's injury is a bit more serious. Longbottom? Professor McGonagall scanned the crowd, and upon seeing the faint bloodstains on the white gauze wrapped around Neville's arm, she gasped. Rushing to his side, she asked in a panic, What happened to the boy, Atticus? Don't tell me he fought that monster of yours again? That's exactly it, Atticus replied, dumbfounded. Mr. Longbottom always seems to believe that fists are more effective than wands in a crisis. As he glanced around, the anger and concern in Professor McGonagall's eyes were unmistakable. Professor McGonagall finally felt a sense of relief. Just as Atticus Blaine had assured her, most of the young wizards from Slytherin and Gryffindor had only taken a couple of sips of cold water. To prevent them from catching a cold, Madame Pomfrey had given them a few doses of her specie, all-refreshing potion, and sent them off for a hot bath, as the school hospital didn't have enough beds to accommodate everyone. Only those who had been hit by the water arrow or were slightly injured, like Neville, were allowed to rest there. Well, since that's the case, Professor McGonagall's breathing gradually steadied. She looked at Wood and Harry and said, While I can agree to postpone the Hufflepuff game, I believe Gryffindor students should be brave. Wood, I still hope you give it your all in tomorrow's match. At Hogwarts, the seriousness of a situation was often gauged by the presence or absence of the great Albus Dumbledore. Now that it was confirmed Atticus had not caused any trouble, Professor McGonagall, with many other matters to attend to, hurried away with a stern expression. She had come to inform Atticus that Gryffindor, having defeated the Hinklepunk, had won the final victory in their practical class and received a 50-point reward, though this did little to lift her spirits. Then, Please rest well here. Atticus, who hadn't even had lunch, rubbed his protesting stomach and smiled. Professor Lupin isn't feeling well, so I need to return to the office to care for him. Amidst the silent, glaring eyes of the young wizards, Atticus smiled cheerfully. Suddenly, he noticed a head peeking out from behind the curtain in the girls' ward, hesitantly looking in his direction. Atticus raised an eyebrow and turned to Harry and Ron, who seemed oblivious, though Ron had clearly noticed but was pretending otherwise. Still causing trouble? Atticus asked gently as he approached Ron's hospital bed. Oh, Professor. Ron's tone had softened since the initial anger, but he still spoke with resentment. That cat obviously killed Scabbers, but she never apologized. Ron's mouse had died under suspicious circumstances, and Atticus didn't believe the clever ginger cat Crookshanks was responsible. On the night of the welcome dinner, Atticus had sensed Crookshanks at the Shrieking Shack, and given the distance from Hogwarts and the timing of the dinner, the cat couldn't have committed the act. However, Atticus wasn't inclined to clear the cat's name. After listening to Ron's muttered complaints, Atticus smiled slightly and said, Life is a one-way street with no turning back, Mr. Weasley. I've seen and experienced much, long ago, where impulsive words and actions led to a lifetime of regret and pain. I don't want you three to repeat those mistakes. As Ron blinked, trying to grasp the meaning, Atticus pursed his lips and leisurely walked out of the school hospital. End of this chapter. Chapter 210, Dementors. The weather on Saturday was still dreadful. The sky was a tumultuous canvas of layered clouds, occasionally illuminated by heart-pounding flashes of lightning. Rain poured relentlessly, though the wind had mercifully calmed since the previous day. Yesterday, the gusts were so fierce that anyone daring enough to mount a broomstick risked being blown into the Black Lake. Despite the inclement weather, the opening match of the annual Quidditch tournament was set to begin. Early in the morning, eager young wizards from the four houses gathered in small groups, clutching umbrellas as they braved the strong winds to reach the stadium. Their enthusiastic chatter nearly drowned out the howling wind and rain. Wood, who had been anxious all night due to an incident in the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, rose early. On his way to the school hospital, he picked up some porridge and sausage for Harry, though he ended up eating it himself. Upon entering the hospital, he was relieved to find Harry, already dressed in his bright red uniform, stretching and preparing for the game. "I was dreaming about it last night," Wood said, handing Harry the breakfast. "If you couldn't play today, I was ready to storm into Professor Blaine's office and confront him." "Don't be ridiculous, Wood," Harry replied, feeling quite well and in high spirits after their victory over Slytherin the previous day. "Even if we all teamed up, we wouldn't stand a chance against Professor Blaine. I wonder if he'll come to watch our game." "I hope he doesn't," Wood grumbled. "I've realized that nothing good happens when he's around." In truth, Atticus Blaine had no intention of attending the game. Despite having been in the magical world for some time, he had little interest in Quidditch, a sport beloved by many. It wasn't due to a lack of skill. In fact, Atticus, who traveled frequently, was quite adept at flying broomsticks. During missions, he often alternated between using a broomstick and apparition to cover long distances. Atticus pushed open the door to his office, pausing to glance at the crowds gathering outside the castle. Finding nothing amiss, he walked over to the camp bed in the room. There lay Remus, looking frail and sickly. Atticus placed a plate of sausage and bread on the floor beside the bed. "Here, it's time for breakfast," he said. "Atticus," Remus replied with a weak smile, "I ate on the floor yesterday because I was a wolf then, but that doesn't mean I enjoy it." "Oh," Atticus feigned surprise, scratching his head. "Sorry, I forgot about that." Remus, though amused, didn't believe him for a second. He struggled to sit up, his eyelids heavy with fatigue. He knew Atticus enjoyed teasing him, likely aware of the past grievances between Remus and Snape, Atticus's favorite professor. Despite the jest, Atticus felt a pang of sympathy for Remus. The fate of a wizard like Remus Lupin, who had become a werewolf by accident, was indeed tragic. In their previous conversations, Atticus had learned that every month, on the night of the full moon, Remus would isolate himself in a deserted area, setting up protective spells to prevent anyone from stumbling upon him. In his transformed state, unable to control his violent urges, Remus often ended up injuring himself. Without enough galleons to afford healing potions, his wounds took longer to heal. The full moon was approaching slowly, casting its silvery glow over the landscape. Within the walls of Hogwarts, Remus Lupin found solace in the Wolfsbane potion, a concoction hailed as a savior for werewolves. Yet despite its reputation, the potion was far from a perfect solution. Atticus Blaine, though not as gifted in potion-making as he was in spellcraft, had a keen understanding of its complexities. While he couldn't claim mastery, his knowledge was formidable. The Wolfsbane potion was the brainchild of one of the few remaining potion masters, Damocles, who had a moment of inspiration. Atticus had studied it extensively. The potion's efficacy lay in its principle of godding poison with poison, using a rival toxin to suppress the werewolf's curse during the magical surge of the full moon. However, the potion was a double-edged sword. It was a magical virus that intertwined with the user's magic. As it neutralized the werewolf's curse, it also sapped the user's health and magical energy. Consequently, werewolves who consumed it would find themselves weakened after the full moon, and excessive use could even shorten their lifespan. Speaking of which, after breakfast, Lupin, feeling unwell, approached the window. He hesitated to open it, wary of the wind and rain, and instead listened through the foggy glass. His thoughts drifted to an old friend, once celebrated as a Quidditch prodigy. Memories of carefree school days brought a smile to his lips. Even Albus left his office to watch the game. "Why didn't you?" "I'm only interested in things that can enhance my abilities." Atticus replied calmly from his desk, engrossed in theoretical research on the blood curse. "You push yourself too hard, Atticus," Lupin remarked, leaning against the cold glass. Despite his concern, he couldn't help but admire Atticus, who was deeply absorbed in his studies, indifferent to the world around him. At just 20, Atticus possessed a strength that even Albus Dumbledore praised. Talent alone didn't account for everything. The fire crackled and popped in the hearth, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill that seeped through the room. Remus, feeling the cold, moved closer to the window near the fireplace. He listened to the distant calls outside while scanning the front page of the latest Daily Prophet. The Minister of Magic was boasting about their remarkable success in capturing Sirius Black. Remus's expression darkened as he recalled Black's recent mysterious entry into Hogwarts. He turned away from Atticus, gazing out the window in contemplation. How had Black managed to infiltrate Hogwarts? Everyone, including Dumbledore and Atticus, was speculating. Remus feigned ignorance, but deep down, he had a suspicion that was uncomfortably close to the truth. Yet he couldn't confront it, nor did he have the courage to voice it, for doing so would mean betraying Dumbledore's trust. "It doesn't have to be this way," Remus murmured, his voice as bleak as the weather outside. Perhaps he learned a few tricks from Voldemort. The transformation had left him weak, and the cold air from the window made him shiver. He retreated to the hearth, trying to warm his hands, but the chill seemed to seep into his very bones, leaving him with a sense of inescapable despair. White frost crept from the window cracks like the tendrils of a devil's snare, and dark magic lingered in the air. The room was in disarray, a testament to the chaos that had unfolded. Atticus Blaine, deep in thought at his desk, suddenly lifted his head. His gaze fell upon Lupine, who stood by the fireplace, her face pale with fury and her body swaying slightly. Her lavender eyes burned with anger. "Do you dare come to my place looking for trouble? Are you tired of living?" he challenged, his voice cutting through the tension. End of this chapter. Wand out of his sleeve, but before he could act, a powerful Patronus burst forth from the stands. It was a magnificent stag, its antlers gleaming with an ethereal light, charging fearlessly at the Dementors that had dared to invade the Quidditch pitch. The stag's presence was like a beacon of hope, its light cutting through the oppressive darkness and sending the Dementors retreating into the shadows from whence they came. The crowd gasped collectively, their eyes wide with awe and relief. The Patronus galloped across the field, its hooves barely touching the ground, as it chased away the last of the Dementors. The oppressive chill that had gripped the stadium began to lift, replaced by a warmth that spread through the stands like a comforting embrace. Atticus Blaine, a student known for his quiet demeanor and exceptional magical prowess, stood at the edge of the stands, his wand still raised. His face was a mask of concentration, his eyes locked on the retreating Dementors. The stag was his Patronus, a testament to his inner strength and courage. As the last of the dark creatures vanished, the stag turned its head towards Atticus, nodding once before dissolving into a mist of silver light. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of rain pattering softly against the ground. Slowly, the crowd began to stir, whispers of disbelief and admiration rippling through the stands. Atticus lowered his wand, his expression unreadable, as he turned his attention back to the field. Harry, who had been plummeting towards the ground, was caught just in time by a swift spell from Dumbledore. The headmaster's quick reflexes and powerful magic gently lowered Harry to the ground, where he lay unconscious, but unharmed. Ron and Hermione rushed to his side, their faces etched with worry and relief. Dumbledore, his expression a mix of pride and concern, approached Atticus. "That was a remarkable Patronus, Mr. Blaine," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that matched the light of the stag. "You have done a great service today." Atticus nodded, his gaze still fixed on the spot where the Dementors had disappeared. "I just did what needed to be done," he replied quietly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. As the rain continued to fall, the Quidditch match was called off, the players and spectators making their way back to the castle. The events of the day would be talked about for weeks to come, the story of the Patronus that saved the day becoming a legend in its own right. And Atticus Blaine, the quiet student with the powerful Patronus, would be remembered as a hero. Atticus Blaine held his wand firmly, but as he attempted to move, Professor McGonagall's grip on his arm rendered him immobile. A flicker of helplessness crossed Dumbledore's eyes. With time running out, he extended his left hand, pointing his slender index finger at Harry, who began to slow his descent. Just as Dumbledore was about to retract his right hand to fend off the approaching Dementors, a surge of magical energy, like molten lava, emanated from the third floor of the castle, causing him to pause and exhale in relief. Boom! The sound of Atticus Blaine shattering the window of his office pierced the otherwise silent world. The sudden eruption of magic caused the rain to tremble, and a wave of white light burst from the window frame, expanding and colliding with the air. Countless raindrops suspended in midair vanished, leaving the world in a state of bewildering transformation. Atticus, with a calm demeanor but eyes sharp as lightning, surveyed the dozens of Dementors hovering in the air. He lifted his robe and stepped through the shattered window, transforming into a shadow that swiftly traversed the mile-long distance to the Quidditch pitch, where he stood on the tall ring. Crack! A bolt of blue-purple lightning tore through the sky, striking the muddy ground. In the storm's chaos, the brilliant flash illuminated Atticus's stern profile, a sight that would remain etched in the memories of all present. What is Professor Blaine doing? The Hufflepuff team members hovered in the air, bewildered, while the Weasley brothers from Gryffindor rushed to check on Harry. Hermione and Ron halted, gazing up at the figure standing amidst the thunder. Against the backdrop of the storm, Professor Blaine appeared godlike, evoking both awe and confusion. "Put them back where they belong, Atticus." Dumbledore's voice, amplified by magic, resonated with authority from the stands. Atticus nodded slightly, his gaze fixed coldly on the cluster of Dementors above, resembling black harbingers of death. A torrent of magic surged forth like a river, and in the gloomy world a bright moon began to rise. "What in the world?" Fred muttered, his hands trembling as he dropped his broom into the mud, staring at the silver creature that filled the sky. Its massive form, like a winding mountain range, encircled the entire Quidditch field. Hermione's legs gave way, and she knelt in the mud, her body quivering with fear. Ron, equally shaken, struggled to offer support. The giant serpent unfurled its white wings, casting billions of strands of silver mist over the ground, freeing the young wizards from the Dementors' influence. Yet the atmosphere remained somber. With the appearance of Atticus's Patronus, the Quidditch field sank into a deeper silence. Every student who gazed at the shadow that blotted out the sky felt an overwhelming sense of oppression, as if staring directly at a deity, pushing them to the brink of collapse. "How?" Snape murmured from the stands. "Did it become so large?" "Have you encountered Atticus's Patronus before, Severus?" Dumbledore inquired solemnly, his gaze intense. Snape hesitated under Dumbledore's scrutiny, his lips twitching. "I offered him some guidance when he was learning the Patronus charm, but the creature's size seemed normal back then." "What on earth is this, Albus?" Professor McGonagall exclaimed, clutching her chest in astonishment. Her voice was faint as she continued. "Is this a Patronus?" "It's a Teng snake, Professor," Hagrid replied, his voice quivering with awe. "It's a magical creature from the East, thought to have been extinct for ages." Atticus Blaine, the one who had conjured such an extraordinary Patronus, stood nearby, his brow furrowed in concentration. End of this chapter. Chapter 212, Strange Occurrences. A magical creature from the East, the Teng snake? Professor McGonagall gasped, as if someone had taken her breath away. "The patron saint of magical creatures, Albus. I've never seen anything like it, except with you." "Very rare indeed," Dumbledore replied, his eyes fixed on the enormous white snake that loomed over them. He frowned, adding, "But it's not unique. What truly surprises me is the size of this Patronus. Such a massive form has never been documented before. Could it be related to magic, Albus?" Professor Flitwick interjected, his voice high-pitched with excitement. "I'm afraid not," Dumbledore responded gravely. "We all know that the Patronus charm is the only spell wizards can use to repel Dementors, those evil creatures that cannot be destroyed. Its power stems from the most positive emotions within us. In essence, the strength of this spell is drawn from our souls." "So, does Atticus Blaine possess an exceptionally powerful soul?" Professor Flitwick asked eagerly, his passion for spells evident. However, Dumbledore did not respond. His serious expression suggested he did not share this view. While Dumbledore and the other professors discussed the astonishing Patronus, Atticus Blaine himself was equally bewildered. Yes, he had intended to summon his Patronus to drive away the rogue Dementors, but the colossal creature before him left everyone on the Quidditch pitch, including Atticus, in a state of confusion. It wasn't just the wizards who were perplexed. The Dementors, floating like specters of death, were also bewildered. They hovered before the massive snake's head, a creature seemingly plucked from myth, and felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity rather than fear. At that moment, the Teng snake, towering as high as the main building of Hogwarts Castle, flapped its white wings. Under Atticus's focused gaze, one of the wings began to darken, as if ink had spilled into clear water. Within moments, the wing turned completely black. Now the Patronus, resembling an earthly python, had one black wing and one white, creating an eerie contrast. With a hum, an invisible wave emanated from the black wing, sweeping across the field. The Dementors, caught in the energy's path, seemed drawn to it, clustering around the black wing like bees to nectar. The Dementors, a young wizard murmured absently. Can Professor Blaine control them? The crowd stirred uneasily, exchanging nervous glances, alarmed by the unsettling possibility. Controlling Dementors? In the wizarding world, if there were a vote for the most terrifying creature, the Dementors, Azkaban's merciless wardens, capable of draining happiness and magic from wizards, leaving them soulless, would surely win by a landslide. Much like Parseltongue, the ability to control such fearsome creatures was not a skill any respectable wizard would possess. The whispers of the young wizards reached the ears of the faculty in the stands, casting a shadow over their expressions. "What do you think, Albus?" Professor McGonagall asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "I see nothing wrong with it, Minerva." Snape interjected brusquely before Dumbledore could respond. "Atticus has unparalleled talent in spell modification. Perhaps he simply altered the Patronus charm." "A reasonable hypothesis, Severus," Dumbledore said, suppressing the astonishment on his aged face. Atticus Blaine regained his composure, his sharp eyes fixed on the figure standing atop the high pole. After a moment of contemplation, he swiftly descended from the platform and made his way to the court below. Suddenly, the ground rumbled, and to the astonishment of the young wizards, a massive stone pillar erupted from the cracked earth. This pillar lifted Dumbledore into the air, bringing him alongside Atticus at the tower's height. Initially, Dumbledore assumed that Atticus was in control of the situation. However, upon seeing Atticus's solemn expression, his gray hair fluttering in the wind, Dumbledore realized his assumption was incorrect. "Has anything like this happened before, Atticus?" he inquired, his voice soft yet filled with concern. The sheer size of the phenomenon was awe-inspiring, even for a wizard of Dumbledore's caliber. Observing the Patronus, which seemed to block out the sky and sun, was enough to make anyone uneasy. Dumbledore, after a moment of hesitation, met Atticus's gaze and asked again. "No, Headmaster Dumbledore," Atticus replied, shaking his head. "I've mastered the Patronus charm for several years. I used it against Voldemorts in Papua New Guinea before, and it was always the size people are familiar with. This is the first time I've used it against Dementors. What do you make of it?" Faced with this unprecedented magical occurrence, Dumbledore was cautious in forming a conclusion. His blue eyes drifted to the scorched black wing of the Tang snake. As a saint with a unique perspective, Dumbledore suppressed the unsettling thoughts swirling in his mind and spoke gently. "It's hard to say, Atticus. What concerns me is whether you can still control your Patronus." Atticus squinted, assessing his control over the Patronus, and nodded slowly. "It's the same as before," he confirmed. Relieved that the Tang snake had not lost control, Dumbledore's demeanor relaxed. If Atticus had indeed lost control and allowed the massive creature to wreak havoc at Hogwarts, Dumbledore knew he would have been hard-pressed to manage it. "In that case," Dumbledore said, glancing at the increasingly anxious young wizards, the fear incited by the Dementor had shifted to concern for Atticus. With a sigh, he continued, "Let it go, Atticus. I fear it will frighten the children." "Very well," Atticus agreed, flicking his wand. Although his Patronus couldn't manifest in reality like Gryffindor's, its immense presence was enough to instill a fear of impending doom. Many young wizards turned and fled, some so frightened they were paralyzed on the ground. The snake's mountainous body coiled tightly around the Dementors. After a burst of dazzling light, the awe-inspiring snake vanished, leaving Atticus holding a dark, bitterly cold glass bottle. "Every Dementor is registered with the Ministry of Magic," Dumbledore remarked helplessly. "They won't allow such a creature to remain in private hands, Atticus." "Then let the Minister of Magic come and retrieve it from me personally, Dumbledore," Atticus replied coldly, his mood clearly sour. End of this chapter. Chapter 213, World Hostility? No one could have predicted that the Quidditch preliminaries, anticipated for half a year, would conclude in such an unexpected manner. Hufflepuff emerged victorious, yet their faces showed little excitement. Gryffindor, having lost their first match, lacked the energy to mourn their defeat. Even Slytherin forgot to revel in Gryffindor's misfortune, reminiscent of a tragic Waterloo. The Fendor team sneered, while most young wizards from the four houses gathered in their common rooms, discussing the shocking events that had unfolded on the pitch. The younger students learned from their soon-to-graduate seniors that the spell Professor Blaine had cast was the Patronus Charm, a highly advanced form of white magic specifically used to combat terrifying entities like Dementors. "Combat them?" Justin Finch Fletchley exclaimed in the Hufflepuff common room, addressing the students around him. "I thought that strange snake was the master of the Dementor." "Don't say that, Justin," Hannah Abbott chided gently. "We can't make the same mistake again, can we? Last year during Lockhart's dueling lesson, that great fraud Potter used Parseltongue to stop Malfoy's conjured snake from attacking you. Today's situation is almost the same. The professors have already explained that Professor Blaine used a modified Patronus charm to deal with the Dementors. The spell hasn't been tested in actual combat, so it seemed a bit unusual." "I feel like that's just an excuse, Hannah," Justin replied, unconvinced. "But at least," Ernie Macmillan interjected with a shrug, "after Professor Blaine conjured the Patronus, I didn't feel cold anymore. Before that, I'd rather die than enter Azkaban." Similar discussions echoed throughout the school. Advanced white magic? Do you believe that nonsense? In my opinion, it's very advanced black magic. Draco Malfoy exclaimed excitedly in the Slytherin common room. "I've known for a long time that he has this ability. I dare say even the Dark Lord might not be able to do it." In Slytherin, many young wizards had fathers who were loyal followers of Voldemort. Among them, most still believed the Dark Lord could bring unprecedented glory to pure-blood families. However, Draco's assessment did not receive the admiration he anticipated. Even his loyal followers, Crabbe and Goyle, seemed hesitant to agree. Meanwhile, in the school hospital, Madame Pomfrey had just seen off the Gryffindor team captain who had come to visit Harry. She was cleaning up the muddy floor with a displeased expression. After some time and Professor Blaine's explanation, Hermione and Ron finally stood together again. Although the issue of Scabbers remained unresolved, they tacitly chose to ignore it. "You can't imagine how big that thing was, Harry," Ron exclaimed, gesturing wildly with his arms. He looked awestruck, his tone filled with reverence. "That snake was as tall as Gryffindor Tower, with wings on its back. It was all silvery white at first, but then one of the wings turned black for some reason. Those Dementors surrounded it, flying around like—" Ron struggled to find a suitable metaphor to describe the Dementor's appearance, eventually settling on the word kind. "That's not normal, is it?" Hermione said, her voice tinged with worry, contrasting Ron's excitement. Professor Blaine's magic looked similar to when Professor Lupin dealt with the Dementor on the train. Both conjured silvery creatures that emitted a silvery mist, but their effects were quite different. "Perhaps Professor Blaine has a greater mastery of this magic," Ron shrugged, speaking in a casual tone. "It's obvious, isn't it? You can tell just by looking at the shape of the things he creates." "The Dementors," Harry murmured, grateful that Ron and Hermione could communicate normally again. After today's events, it was a rare comfort for him. Lying on the hospital bed, he listened to Ron and Hermione discuss Professor Blaine's Patronus. From Ron's description, Harry could imagine the marvel Professor Blaine had conjured, but he wasn't in the mood to be impressed. His mind was still reeling from the defeat against the Dementors, which had cost Gryffindor a crucial match. Worse, he couldn't shake the memory of the desperate voice he heard while unconscious. "Where are the Dementors?" Harry asked quietly. "They're all locked up." Professor Blaine was furious. "I've never seen him like that," Hermione replied, her voice trembling. "He probably felt he failed in his duty. When he flew off the handle, Professor McGonagall asked how he planned to deal with the Dementors. He said he'd wait for Fudge to come in person and explain why the Dementors went rogue." Harry nodded, his lips pressed tightly together, as his thoughts drifted back to that haunting voice. A sudden gust of wind swept into the room through the partially open window, causing the curtains to flutter. Ron quickly closed the window, and when he turned back, Harry finally looked up. "My broom, did you manage to retrieve it for me?" Harry asked, noticing Ron's hesitation. His heart sank further, and he asked instinctively, "Is it broken?" "Not exactly," Hermione said hesitantly. "When you fell, it got blown away. Everyone was startled by Professor Blaine's Patronus, and, well, you know the Whomping Willow is right by the playground." In the headmaster's office, Fawkes held his head high, his ruby-like eyes reflecting a wandering silver dragon. The portraits on the walls whispered among themselves, their focus on the black-and-white winged dragon snake gliding around the office. Dumbledore's expression was more serious than ever, his azure eyes shining with an intensity that impressed Atticus Blaine, who stood beside him, feeling a slight pressure from the headmaster's presence. "All right, Atticus," Dumbledore finally sighed, his voice weary. The soft murmurs in the office ceased, and even the portraits paused, anticipating his words. "Have you discovered anything, Headmaster?" Atticus asked, dismissing his Patronus with a calm demeanor. "Sit down, let's talk," Dumbledore said, returning to his desk and gesturing for Atticus to join him. Their eyes met, but neither gleaned anything from the other's gaze, as both were employing occlumency. "Before we let our imaginations run wild with speculation, Atticus, I must ask," Dumbledore said, resting his chin on his hands. "Is there anything you wish to share with me? Any experiences that might bring us closer to the truth?" Experiences. The prophecy of the Druid ancestor priest that inexplicably involved him? The collapse of the Isle of Avalon, Gryffindor appearing before him across millennia? Or the double snake staff, prophesied to be his alone, which had mysteriously slipped from his control and vanished after that woman Corona? Atticus sighed inwardly, contemplating the weight of these mysteries. Why is there so much hostility towards travelers in this world? End of chapter. Chapter 214, You Might Be a Horcrux. For a moment, countless thoughts raced through Atticus Blaine's mind, yet he maintained a calm demeanor as he met Dumbledore's gaze. "I would like to hear your opinion first, Headmaster Dumbledore," he said. A trace of helplessness crossed Dumbledore's aged face. He was aware that Atticus was withholding some crucial information, but he had no means to compel the young man to reveal what he was unwilling to share, whether through reason or force. "Let me start with my conclusions, Atticus," Dumbledore began. Compared to the potential issues surrounding Atticus, the bitterness of not being trusted seemed trivial. Dumbledore's expression turned grave, a seriousness that made everyone and everything in the office acutely aware of the gravity of the situation. We all know that a Patronus is a magical creature that reflects one's mind, or can also reflect the soul. Therefore, the root of your Patronus's mutation lies within your soul, Atticus. My observations have confirmed this speculation." "Your observations?" Atticus interjected, his tone tinged with skepticism. The first part of Dumbledore's statement hadn't exceeded his understanding. The greatest wizard of their time, with suspicion in his voice, continued, "If you mean observation from the perspective of magical power—" "It's not a magical perspective, Atticus," Dumbledore replied calmly. "Yes, you heard me correctly. I can see into a person's soul, or at least I used to be able to. This ability has diminished over time. Of course, this isn't the core of our discussion. If you're interested, I can share more about this knowledge later." Without waiting for Atticus's response, Dumbledore proceeded to share his conclusion, a blend of conjecture and observation. "I don't believe your soul is entirely your own, Atticus. I vaguely saw another presence within your soul." The room fell silent, and the portraits of past headmasters displayed expressions of shock. Fawkes, perched on his golden branch, ceased his melodious cries, listening intently. "You mean to say," Atticus spoke slowly, carefully choosing his words, "that there is another soul lurking within mine?" "I'm not certain," Dumbledore admitted, shaking his head, his silver beard swaying. "I only had a very, very faint impression, like an illusion. But if it's not an illusion, then that presence doesn't belong to you." Dumbledore appeared hesitant. If Atticus, whose soul is it? I've encountered similar situations before." "Where?" Atticus asked tersely, sensing that the shadow looming over him was about to be unveiled once more. As Dumbledore spoke, the portraits on the walls collectively gasped. These magical portraits, imbued with the memories of their original selves, were quick-witted wizards who understood Dumbledore's secret. For most, a single sentence was enough to conjure numerous thoughts. The air grew tense, and even the flickering candlelight on the desk's corner seemed to freeze. Dumbledore regarded Atticus, who waited patiently for his answer, this young wizard whose brilliance had far surpassed his expectations. In his heart, Dumbledore wrestled with a difficult decision. "If it's truly challenging, Dumbledore," Atticus began, realizing that the similar situation Dumbledore referred to was far from simple. "It's certainly not an easy secret, Atticus," Dumbledore smiled, "but I believe you are undoubtedly trustworthy. My previous hesitation was merely an old man's stubborn habit. Indeed, it was a peculiar habit, never missing an opportunity to win trust." Atticus pursed his lips in contemplation. "I think you must still remember what happened in last semester at this school. The Chamber of Secrets was opened again after 50 years, and 2 innocent young wizards were attacked," Dumbledore explained. "That's precisely why I returned to Hogwarts." Atticus Blaine nodded in agreement. Dumbledore continued with a gentle smile. "Before you came back, there were rumors circulating that Harry was the heir of Salazar Slytherin. Do you know why, Atticus?" "Because he can speak Parseltongue?" Atticus replied. Dumbledore nodded. "Indeed, but we now know that both 50 years ago and last year, the one who opened the Chamber of Secrets was Tom Riddle, also known as the Dark Lord. He, too, is a Parseltongue. What do you think the connection between them might be, Atticus?" "I don't believe they are related by blood," Atticus said, narrowing his eyes. He now understood why Dumbledore had been so hesitant earlier. Before his downfall, the last person Tom killed was Harry's mother. He then attempted to kill Harry with the killing curse, but instead of leaving Harry with just a scar, the spell rebounded and destroyed Tom himself. Dumbledore's voice softened, like a whisper in a dream. Fawkes' mournful cry echoed in the quiet room as Atticus leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The atmosphere in the office was heavy, and even the wind outside the castle seemed muted. Dumbledore remained silent, his gaze fixed sadly on his old, frail hands resting on the table. The only indication that time was still passing was the candle slowly melting away. Atticus sighed deeply, breaking the silence. "So, you suspect that I, like Potter, might have been turned into a Horcrux, don't you, Headmaster Dumbledore?" "I won't lie to you, Atticus," Dumbledore said, removing his glasses and rubbing his temples. "I believe it's a possibility. However, based on your behavior, you seem unaware of any such thing, which is puzzling. I am certain that no one could quietly place a soul fragment within a wizard like you unless your memory has been tampered with." Atticus did not respond to Dumbledore's speculation or probing. Since his arrival in this world, he had been aware of his own memories, and at least now he understood why he could handle the staff of 2 snakes, a feat even Gryffindor could not achieve. End of this chapter. Chapter 215, The Origin of the Dementor. Dumbledore had misjudged Atticus Blaine's reaction. He had anticipated that upon hearing his conjecture, Atticus would become anxious, perhaps even violent, succumbing to uncontrollable fear. Yet, contrary to his expectations, Atticus remained unexpectedly calm. Was this calmness genuine, or was it a facade? Dumbledore, with over a century of life experience, believed he could discern the disguises of the occult. What had Atticus experienced? What was he hiding? And how could he maintain such composure? Dumbledore was eager to unravel these mysteries. "Let's discuss this one step at a time, Headmaster Dumbledore," Atticus said, rubbing his temples warily. "Certainly," Dumbledore replied with a smile. It had been quite some time since Atticus had returned to Hogwarts, and his habits were becoming increasingly apparent. Dumbledore stood, flicked his wand from his sleeve, and with a wave, conjured a steaming cup of green tea for Atticus. For himself, he prepared a cup of honey water. "Allow me to recommend a very interesting and delicious treat to you, Atticus." Despite the gravity of the situation, Dumbledore, who had weathered many storms throughout his life, had developed an exceptionally resilient mindset. He shook his sleeves, turned, and retrieved a jar from the table where the sorting hat rested. With a chuckle, he said to Atticus, "The owner of Honeyduke's candy store, Ciceron Haggis, is a friend of mine. He knows my tastes and often sends me new products to sample." With that, Dumbledore opened the jar, rolled up his sleeves, and reached inside. However, after a prolonged moment of fumbling, his hand remained within. Are you catching bugs, Headmaster Dumbledore? Atticus asked, amused by Dumbledore's antics. But his laughter soon faded. Oh yes, these little guys are sharper than you'd imagine. Dumbledore winked at Atticus, and in the next moment withdrew his hand from the jar, holding a wriggling, shrieking object, which he presented to Atticus as if it were a treasure. Atticus, taken aback, exclaimed, "The name of this candy is Cockroach Cluster, and its inventor, Mr. Haggis, is still debating whether to introduce it to the wizarding world." "I think Mr. Haggis should reconsider," Atticus said, turning away in disgust. "And perhaps he should visit St. EU Mungo's for a brain check." "Oh, it seems we can't agree," Dumbledore said regretfully. In front of Atticus, who was visibly uncomfortable, he cheerfully popped the overly realistic candy into his mouth, chewing with delight. After a few seconds, Dumbledore paused. "This little guy might have taken one of my teeth," he said painfully, "and I seem to have swallowed it. Oh, what a terrible loss." Enough with the theatrics, old man, Atticus thought, though the atmosphere in the office had lightened considerably. Dumbledore and Atticus leaned back in their chairs, each holding their respective drinks, as if they were casually discussing the weather. Blowing on the hot tea to cool it, Atticus took a sip, savoring the bitter warmth as it flowed down his throat and settled in his stomach. He sighed with relief. "Regarding your earlier hypothesis, Headmaster Dumbledore, I noticed you described it as, 'I vaguely perceive power that does not belong to me.' So, does that mean you're uncertain whether it's a soul fragment of a particular wizard or perhaps a Horcrux?" "We both understand the essence of a Horcrux, Atticus," Dumbledore said, raising his gaze to the colorful patterns on the ceiling, said, "A fragment of a soul protected by powerful and malevolent magic. Each soul is as unique as our magic. Unless that soul belongs to you, they can only coexist without merging." "You mean to say that your observation suggests this thing is intertwined with my soul?" Atticus Blaine inquired. "I believe so," Dumbledore replied, scrutinizing Atticus as if to confirm his own judgment. "It's a very close connection, lurking within your soul. It's like—" Dumbledore hesitated, searching for the right words. His gaze drifted to the green tea Atticus held. "It's like two drinks of different colors that cannot blend. Of course, we can't rule out the possibility that it is a soul fragment. My theory is based on speculation, and the deepest aspects of Horcrux magic remain beyond our full understanding." Atticus nodded slightly, acknowledging Dumbledore's assessment of the Horcrux. Indeed, in the current wizarding world, it was Voldemort who possessed the deepest knowledge of Horcruxes, not he or Albus Dumbledore. Memory again. Dumbledore fell silent, and Atticus was lost in thought. Whether it was a Horcrux or something else, the foreign object in Atticus's soul was undoubtedly the work of a wizard, yet he had no memory of it. "If you truly have no knowledge of this matter," Dumbledore began, his tone hesitant, "if you would allow—" "Thank you for your kindness, Headmaster Dumbledore," Atticus interrupted, meeting Dumbledore's gaze with a slight smile. "I will not permit anyone to examine my memories." Dumbledore was not surprised by Atticus's response. Even the closest of partners might not bear the thought of another knowing all their memories. While they couldn't make an accurate guess about the nature of the entity in Atticus's soul, they could at least confirm some things. Thump. The bottom of the glass bottle made a crisp sound as it touched the table. The portraits of previous headmasters on the wall collectively gasped at the sight of the bottle, now completely dark. "Over the years, I have been exposed countless times under your watch, Headmaster Dumbledore," Atticus recalled, thinking of the inexplicable stirring in his heart when he summoned the Patronus on the Quidditch pitch. His eyes met Dumbledore's, who was solemnly observing the Dementor, one of the most malevolent creatures in the magical world. "But you never noticed anything unusual about me until I summoned the Patronus just now, facing the Dementor." "I understand your point, Atticus," Dumbledore sighed. "As for the Dementors, which cannot be destroyed by magic, even the Patronus can only suppress them. The origin of these creatures remains a mystery in the magical world. Some records suggest that a dark wizard named Extus created the Dementors in the 15th century. However, according to some internal records of the Ministry of Magic, the investigators of the Royal Society of Magic found clues on the island of Azkaban, indicating that these creatures have existed for a long time. We don't know exactly when they appeared, nor whether they are magical creatures born of nature or the result of a dark wizard's whim. Judging by the current situation, it's likely they were artificially created. Of course, you might think their creators have some mysterious connection to you, but that doesn't make sense, does it? Dumbledore looked at Atticus with concern. Even if the dreadful creature capable of stealing people's happiness truly originated from that dark wizard of the 15th century, why would it be connected to you? Chapter 216, The Way to Kill the Dementors. Dumbledore's question pulled Atticus Blaine's thoughts back to the collapsed island of Avalon. In the Greek temple at the island's center, he had once seen 9 enormous murals. These murals depicted the legendary battle where King Arthur and Merlin fought against the Queen of Avalon, Morgan Le Fay. In this earth-shattering conflict, Merlin emerged as the sole survivor. King Arthur and Morgan Le Fay, figures immortalized in both Muggle myths and wizarding history, perished, leaving Merlin's fate and the mysterious shadow unknown. As Atticus pondered the shadow, his gaze settled on the bottle on the desk before him, lost in thought. Morgan Le Fay, known as the Witch of Avalon, led the ancient Druid sect. This was well documented in both Muggle and wizarding lore. The shadow within Morgan was only mentioned in myths. Where had it gone? Was it imprisoned by Merlin in the Blackstone Tower? At the battle's end, the shadow had cast out a double snake rod. Dementors. Azkaban. Do you know the exact location of Azkaban, Headmaster Dumbledore? Atticus asked after a prolonged silence, his expression unreadable. Dumbledore wasn't surprised by Atticus's inquiry. After all, Azkaban was where the Dementor that had altered his soul was first discovered. I'm sorry, Atticus, Dumbledore replied, shaking his head. The location of Azkaban is a closely guarded secret in the magical world. It is protected by the Department of Mystery's Silent Man with the Fidelius charm. This secret has been passed down through generations. Even Connolly may not know which Silent Man holds it. How does the Ministry of Magic manage the prisoners in Azkaban? Atticus pressed. Portkeys, Dumbledore explained with a complicated smile. Once the Wizengamot decides a wizard should be sent to Azkaban, the Aurors escort the wizard directly there, using a 2-way portkey setup in the Ministry of Magic. As Atticus listened intently, Dumbledore envisioned a troubling scenario. The infamous bounty hunter known as Gold Viper could potentially infiltrate the Ministry of Magic, disable its defenses, and seize the portkey to Azkaban. The Ministry had yet to discover if Gold Viper had committed such a crime, but it was possible he had been hired to rescue a prisoner from Azkaban. The thought sent a chill through Dumbledore. He knew Atticus possessed the courage and capability to undertake such a mission. If you need to visit Azkaban, Dumbledore said, focusing on the young man deep in thought, I can request permission from Connolly on your behalf, using the pretext of a Defense Against the Dark Arts research project. I believe Connolly would not refuse my request, though he might insist on sending someone like Lou Firth or Barty with you. Atticus frowned. Each of his inquiries could cause a significant stir if revealed, and he preferred not to have so many eyes on him. Thank you for your offer, Headmaster Dumbledore. Atticus nodded appreciatively. I'll find a way myself. Atticus, Dumbledore leaned forward, his blue eyes serious, a hint of warning in his voice. I understand your concerns, Headmaster, Atticus replied with a smile. Rest assured, I'm not an impulsive wizard. I'll wait for the right opportunity and ensure my actions don't cause unnecessary panic. With that, the discussion about visiting Azkaban came to a close. Dumbledore understood that he couldn't deter Atticus Blaine, yet he persistently emphasized the gravity of the situation. If the public discovered that the Ministry of Magic had lost its absolute control over Azkaban, it would be a terrifying revelation for the residents of the British wizarding world. Regarding Dementors, those malevolent creatures, Dumbledore began, aware that Atticus might pursue this line of inquiry. He continued, since their discovery over a dozen centuries ago, wizards have never ceased studying them. In my youth, I attempted to uncover their secrets, though it was merely through research of existing materials. As it is said, they cannot be killed. The only defense against them is the Patronus charm. Even you can't destroy them? Atticus asked, narrowing his eyes. I mean, with all your power? Noticing that the cup in Atticus's hand had cooled, Dumbledore subtly refilled it with a flick of his fingers. In response to Atticus's question, Dumbledore offered a helpless smile, but remained silent. His silence spoke volumes, providing the answer Atticus sought. Atticus pondered this, blowing away the tea leaves from his cup and sipping thoughtfully. Life and death are natural laws, immutable even by magic. If a creature exists with an extraordinarily long life and cannot be killed, why have so many dark wizards and power-hungry individuals throughout history sought ways to evade death, even resorting to splitting their souls to create Horcruxes? Why not study how to become Dementors instead? Unless, of course, a Dementor isn't truly alive. Do Dementors have souls? Atticus asked, blinking his lavender eyes after a moment of contemplation. You've touched on the crux of the matter, Dumbledore replied. For both Dumbledore and Atticus, Dementors, despite their immortality, posed no real threat. With admiration in his blue eyes, Dumbledore continued with a smile. Like you, Atticus, my primary method of researching Dementors has been through literature. Many years ago, a close friend of mine conducted genuine research and mentioned an intriguing theory in a letter. Atticus raised an eyebrow, recalling unverifiable rumors about Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of their time, and his youthful exploits. The idea that Dumbledore's close friend had studied Dementors, creatures so entwined with dark magic, piqued his interest. He believed that a Dementor's soul is its body, a creature of spirit and flesh. Dementors consider evil thoughts as their essence, and there exists a mysterious connection between individuals. Perhaps their life force is interconnected. So it's not that Dementors cannot be killed, but that they cannot be killed individually. Mr. Grindelwald is indeed a genius, Atticus mused, nodding thoughtfully as Dumbledore offered a wry smile. Did Mr. Grindelwald mention anything else, such as the origin or method of creating such creatures? Something happened afterward, Dumbledore said, a fleeting bitterness crossing his aged features. We completely severed private contact. End of this chapter. Chapter 217. Must Harry Die? As the saying goes, the person who knows you best is often your opponent. Since Atticus Blaine entered Hogwarts, he had gained a general understanding of the wizarding world. Especially after the events of his 5th year, he realized that the greatest obstacle he would face in the years to come might not be the official villain of the Harry Potter world, Voldemort, but rather Albus Dumbledore, who, despite his age, stood formidable before him. In his quest to understand Dumbledore better, Atticus delved into the headmaster's past. He explored not only the official background information, but also the whispered rumors that had become legendary. These tales often mentioned the friendship between Gellert Grindelwald and Albus Dumbledore in their youth. Some rumors were so bizarre that Atticus had to shake off his curiosity, realizing they were not suitable for young ears. Piece by piece, like a puzzle, Atticus gathered information and experiences, forming a coherent picture. Yet, the most crucial part of this truth remained shrouded in mystery. The key to this puzzle might lie with Vitia Cleona, a woman as elusive as a shooting star. At the very least, she could explain the chilling staff of 2 snakes and the information it revealed, which had left her visibly shocked in the temple on Avalon Island. To this day, there was no news from Cacus. It seemed that the Druids, who had been hunted by the Holy See for centuries, were indeed adept at concealing themselves. Regarding the foreign body in his soul, Atticus's greatest discovery was that the owner of the 2 snake staff was likely the creator of the Dementors. There's something that just occurred to me, Atticus said, momentarily setting aside his personal quest. He turned his attention to another pressing matter. Of all the things you've told me, one disturbs me the most, he frowned. Putting my questions aside, Headmaster Dumbledore, you believe Harry is a Horcrux of Voldemort. Is this mere speculation, or do you have evidence? Dumbledore had anticipated this question. Many years ago, I thought I'd show you this first, he replied. Rising from his seat, he walked briskly to a silver instrument placed beneath a wall of books. Though Dumbledore held many titles, his proficiency in alchemy was perhaps the least known. Yet, all who visited his office knew he valued this obscure subject, as evidenced by the array of strange and enigmatic devices scattered about. Under Atticus's scrutinizing gaze, Dumbledore placed the instrument on the table, sat down again, and tapped it with his wand. "As I mentioned earlier, Atticus," Dumbledore began, observing Atticus as he analyzed the gleaming silver alchemy device through the lens of magic. "Many in the wizarding world might think I haven't changed over the years. But in truth, as I've aged, some of my abilities have diminished significantly. For instance, my ability to see into a person's soul has waned. This skill was invaluable for identifying magical disguises like the Imperious Curse or Animagus transformations. When I noticed my unique sight fading, I immediately set about designing this device." "It's fascinating," Atticus remarked, his alchemical expertise allowing him to appreciate the complexity of the design. "It's unimaginably intricate, yet truly an exquisite magical corridor design." His own proficiency in alchemy was not insignificant, as evidenced by his creation of devices like the monitoring mirror. After careful observation, he began to understand the instrument's function. "Through the connection between magic power and the soul, we can backtrack." "Fascinating," Atticus Blaine mused. "However, the soul remains a mystery, even to wizards. I suspect we can only observe its surface." "You have a keen insight, Atticus," Dumbledore acknowledged openly, as smoke drifted from the vents. "In all these years, you're the first wizard to discern its function without my explanation. As you noted, it can't delve deeply into a wizard's soul, so it can't reveal what's hidden within. But, for Harry..." Wisps of light green smoke intertwined in the air, forming a snake's head in Atticus's focused gaze. "Actually, I misled you," Dumbledore interjected suddenly as Atticus observed. "I once mentioned that the note you gave me and the crown left by Ms. Ravenclaw resolved 2 mysteries for me. In truth, 12 years ago, when Hagrid brought Harry from the ruins, I already knew that Tom had indeed created Horcruxes." "I understand your point, Headmaster Dumbledore." Atticus sighed, averting his gaze. "A soul connected by some form of magic, yet still functioning as a Horcrux." The topics discussed that evening were far from pleasant. The portraits of past headmasters whispered among themselves, questioning why Dumbledore had shared so much with this enigmatic young wizard. Yet in the office, only the 2 of them remained, exchanging glances in a somber atmosphere. Dumbledore's long, slender fingers intertwined and then released. In the still room, his silver-white eyebrows fluttered slightly with the tremor of his eyelids. "Regarding Tom's Horcruxes, Atticus," Dumbledore shifted the conversation, "there is one thing that brings me some relief. Although we can't be certain how many Horcruxes the nearly hysterical Tom, who feared death's great adventure, created, recent investigations have led me to another potential clue. I plan to leave the school for a while. During my absence, the safety of the students will rest with you, Atticus. I trust you." "What's the point, Headmaster Dumbledore?" Atticus interrupted, meeting Dumbledore's gaze with piercing intensity. "If, to defeat Voldemort, Harry must die first, is this another grand, uncertain plan, or have you discovered a way to remove that fragment of soul without endangering Harry's life?" End of this chapter. Chapter 218. Experience. The wind and rain that had raged for several days finally subsided, though the hazy moonlight remained faintly obscured by thick stratus clouds. Perhaps the Dementors guarding the entrance to Hogwarts had been subdued by Atticus Blaine, and the cold wind lingering on campus now carried a hint of freshness. The night was still young, and many young wizards who had not yet gone to bed were discussing the day's events in the lounges and dormitories. However, the professors remained vigilant, aware that Sirius Black was still lurking in the shadows, posing a threat to the students. Before entering Dumbledore's office, Atticus had taken precautions. That night, Hagrid and Professor Flitwick were stationed at the school gate, while Filch and Professor Snape patrolled the castle, ever watchful for any unexpected occurrences. Suddenly, the unexpected happened. "Yes, Harry must die." Dumbledore's voice was so calm that it sent a shiver down Atticus's spine. "So," Atticus sneered, "you're raising Harry like a pig for slaughter. It's absurd. I thought you were counting on Harry to defeat Voldemort someday. Do you need me to do you a favor? I could rush to the hospital wing right now and end his life." "Please don't misunderstand." Dumbledore, unfazed by Atticus's attitude, nodded and smiled with satisfaction. "I have some ideas. Of course, they're not perfect, as some key assurances are still missing." "What assurances?" Atticus inquired. "Assurances of Harry's safe death," Dumbledore replied. Please forgive me for not being able to share my whimsical ideas with you at the moment, Atticus, but I can assure you that the prerequisite for defeating Voldemort will never be at the expense of Harry. This was truly a paradox. If everything was as Dumbledore claimed, and Harry was indeed a Horcrux of Voldemort, then to completely destroy Voldemort, Harry must first be killed. Yet, Dumbledore's statement left Atticus pondering. He stared at the swirling water in the cup before him, its color a stale brown. Even the tea leaves were old, this black-hearted old man. So, Atticus mused after a moment, frowning slightly, is there actually a way to separate Voldemort's soul from Harry's by having Harry be killed? Let me keep a little mystery, Atticus, Dumbledore said, taking a deep breath and refusing to delve further into the question. It had been several hours since the two had entered the headmaster's office after the day's Quidditch match had ended, and they had been discussing exhausting issues. Both Dumbledore and Atticus were already weary. Dumbledore hesitated as he watched Atticus return the sealed bottle containing a Dementor to his back pocket, but he did not stop him. Like all the faculty and staff, he disapproved of the Ministry of Magic's decision to station these unpleasant creatures around the school. By the way, Atticus. As Atticus prepared to leave, Dumbledore, who had risen to see him off, suddenly stopped him. While I'm away from Hogwarts, if Black. Don't worry, Headmaster Dumbledore. I won't let him harm anyone in this school, not even a mouse. Of course, I trust your abilities, Atticus, but, Atticus prompted. Well, before we took Harry to the real Chamber of Secrets beneath Slytherin, I was inspired by what you said, Atticus. So, Dumbledore hesitated. I hope that if you find any clues about Black, you will allow Harry and his friends to participate to some extent in capturing Black. Of course, safety must be ensured. Atticus raised an eyebrow. Let the three young ones participate in Black's capture? After a moment's thought, Atticus agreed. As long as it didn't interfere with his duties, he saw no harm in letting the youngsters join in. I'll take care of it, Headmaster Dumbledore, Atticus assured, pushing open the gleaming oak door of Dumbledore's office. Atticus Blaine exited his office, casting a glance at the two stone gargoyles by the door. They pretended to open their eyes as he passed, their soft snores echoing in the corridor. His previously muddled thoughts began to clear. Atticus suddenly remembered that he had forgotten to ask Dumbledore about the soul perspective and the clues related to the Horcruxes. One of Voldemort's Horcruxes is worth 8,000, Atticus mused as he descended the tower's spiral staircase. He sighed, contemplating the possibility of encountering another Horcrux in the future. If he could find 100 or so, he thought, he could sell them to Dumbledore and retire comfortably, reaching the pinnacle of his life. The idea was a little thrilling. Dumbledore's office was located in a small, separate tower. After descending to the first floor, Atticus made his way to the foyer, ready to return to his post. His job was to monitor the surveillance cameras throughout the night. If Sirius Black had been lurking around the castle, he would have noticed the absence of the Dementors guarding the school gate. While no sane person would think Hogwarts was unprotected, a madman like Black, who had been tormented by Dementors in Azkaban for 12 years, might see tonight as an opportunity. Lie. Atticus was lost in thought when he heard an angry shout from the hall. The voice belonged to Argus Filch, Atticus's only serious subordinate. It was strange. Hagrid was known as Dumbledore's hawkdog. What's the matter, Argus? Atticus asked, quickly stepping into the light and shadows of the hallway. To his surprise, Professor Snape was also there, standing with a sarcastic expression. Upon seeing Atticus, the gloom around Snape seemed to lift slightly. We're interrogating this empty-headed Mr. Longbottom, Snape sneered, tilting his chin. Caught him wandering the castle in violation of school rules, trying to sneak out. Do you want to hear his absurd excuse, Atticus? Professor Blaine, Filch exclaimed happily. I think this little wizard wants to sneak out to inform Black that all the Dementors have been locked up by you. That criminal might seize the chance to break into the castle tonight. Atticus rolled his eyes at Filch and turned to Neville Longbottom, who was visibly trembling. So, what's your explanation, Mr. Longbottom? He lied about losing his wand, Snape interjected, scrutinizing Atticus before relaxing slightly. I don't have it, Professor, Neville stammered. looking as if he were surrounded by hungry wolves. "It's my dad's wand. If I lose it, my grandma will kill me." "No wizard is foolish enough to misplace their wand, Professor Blaine," Filch barked, his voice echoing harshly in the empty castle. "Look at the little liar, still trying to wriggle out of it. I have a torture device in my office, Professor Blaine. If you need it, I'll fetch it now, or you can interrogate him in my office." "Lost your wand," Atticus sighed, rubbing his forehead. Neville was often confused, but this was a new level. "So you think you dropped it on the Quidditch pitch?" Neville nodded miserably. "All right," Atticus said, glancing at the deep night and Neville's scratched arm. "You can join Mr. Argus on the pitch tomorrow morning to search for your wand. But for now, Mr. Longbottom, I suggest you return to your four-poster bed and get some rest." Hearing this, Filch reacted like a child who had just been told Halloween was cancelled. Dinner was abruptly cancelled, leaving Atticus Blaine with a bewildered and somewhat absurd expression. Before he could voice his true feelings, his boss interjected with an authoritative tone. "Argus, please ensure Mr. Longbottom is safely escorted back to his rightful place." Chapter 219. So, Dumbledore has resolved your issue? Professor Flitwick and Hagrid stood vigil at the gate, while Professor Snape and Filch were assigned to patrol throughout the night. Atticus Blaine, responsible for the safety of all Hogwarts teachers and students, couldn't return to his office to sleep. After dismissing Filch and a rather bewildered Neville, Atticus took a stroll in the courtyard with his former headmaster. Under the cooling glow of the moonlight, the forest's undulating silhouette was visible, and the whiteness of the distant snow began to spread across the landscape. The wind sweeping over the lawn carried the crisp breath of winter, heralding the first snow of 1993. Footsteps approached, and Snape, tilting his head slightly, observed Atticus, who was gazing at the snow-capped mountains in the distance. "I'm afraid the headmaster can't solve my troubles." Atticus yawned, stretching. "My situation is more complicated. I'm afraid, apart from myself, no one else can help me much." Snape understood Atticus's words. His proud student seemed to be saying that even he was helpless regarding his own problems. "When did you get yourself into this trouble?" Snape suddenly asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "I've warned you countless times, Atticus. The world outside Hogwarts isn't as simple. It's not about casting a couple of spells to make everyone cheer. Yet, you still indulge in dangerous pursuits for those worthless gold coins." "My troubles didn't start after I left school, dear Professor Snape," Atticus replied with a gentle smile. "What?" Snape was taken aback by this revelation. His nostrils flared, and his brows furrowed. "Could it be that it started at Hogwarts?" "Who knows?" Atticus mused, placing his hands behind his back and squinting into the distance. The cold wind tousled his hair in the midnight air. "Perhaps it's a trouble I brought upon myself before I was even born." Meanwhile, Madame Pomfrey insisted on keeping Harry in the school hospital for the weekend. He didn't argue or complain, but he refused to let her discard the wreckage of his Nimbus 2000. He knew it was foolish, and that the Nimbus couldn't be repaired, but to Harry, it was more than just a broom, it was a cherished friend. Throughout the weekend, Hagrid, Ginny, and the rest of the Gryffindor team visited him, trying their best to lift his spirits after the previous day's dismal failure. However, Harry felt more exhausted than uplifted. Except for a brief departure at lunchtime, Ron and Hermione stayed by his side, united in their mission to cheer him up. Their efforts seemed to have reconciled them, as they sang and shared the latest news from the Great Hall. Hermione, sitting beside Harry's bed and peeling an orange, expressed her frustration. "The last time was when Mrs. Norris was attacked, and Professor Binns told us about the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets in class. I got up early today to borrow 2 books on the Patronus charm from the library, but Mrs. Pintz said they were all checked out yesterday. Why can't they manage things better and leave some for me?" Under Hermione's indignant gaze, Ron cheekily snatched the orange she had prepared for Harry, stuffing it into his mouth and splattering juice as he chewed. "You don't want to learn everything at once, Hermione," he teased. "Do you really believe in this magic, Hermione?" Ron asked, his face twisted in disbelief. "You heard what Percy said in the common room last night, right? Even the professors can't all handle Dementors, And as for what Professor Blaine did, don't you see, Hermione? Even Dumbledore didn't look much better than us on the Quidditch pitch yesterday. Harry listened quietly as Ron and Hermione debated whether young wizards could truly learn to fend off the dreadful Dementors. A thought suddenly struck him, causing his eyebrows to twitch. Hermione believed that Ron, and perhaps herself, lacked academic motivation. She had been tirelessly encouraging him, but with little success. Although Harry appreciated Hermione's intentions, he wasn't entirely on board with her approach. After all, you can't expect everyone to excel in the same areas, just as he wouldn't ask Hermione to perform a daring broomstick dive. In the end, Hermione couldn't convince Ron to show more enthusiasm for learning. Frustrated, she turned away from him, gazing out the window. The red afterglow of the setting sun spilled into the school hospital, casting a warm light on Ron, who blushed as he shared some news with Harry. Neville's gotten himself into trouble again. "Oh, what's happened now?" Harry asked, frowning as he thought of Neville, who had bravely fought alongside him in Defense Against the Dark Arts class taught by Professor Blaine. "Is it Malfoy's gang?" "It's not Malfoy this time, Harry," Ron replied, rubbing his grumbling stomach and pursing his lips sympathetically. "It's the same old problem. Neville lost something again, and this time it was his wand. It's amazing how Neville can't keep track of his things, unlike those two idiots who follow Malfoy around." Despite Ron's less-than-kind words, Harry couldn't help but agree that Neville had a knack for misplacing things. Neville thought he left his wand on the Quidditch pitch. Last night, he foolishly tried to sneak out of the castle to find it, but he ran into Filch and Snape. Hearing this, Harry sighed for Neville. Losing his wand was bad enough, but encountering the two people he feared most at school made it worse. "And then what happened?" Harry asked, intrigued. "Neville said Filch wanted to punish him, and Snape seemed ready to use him as a potion ingredient. Luckily, Professor Blaine happened by and saved him, ordering Filch to help search for the wand this morning," Ron explained with a shrug. "But I doubt it's on the pitch." "Poor Neville," Hermione said, her voice filled with concern. "How will he attend classes without a wand?" Ron dismissed her worries, believing Neville's wand would turn up soon, much like his elusive toad had in the past. Since Neville wasn't being bullied by Malfoy's gang, Harry wasn't overly concerned. As he fell silent again, a thought crossed his mind. Professor Blaine. He seemed particularly skilled at fixing things. Last year, he had managed to keep Ron's seemingly hopeless wand functional for a while. And he was also adept at dealing with Dementors. End of this chapter. Chapter 220. Young people. According to Ron and Hermione's plans, they intended to visit Harry after dinner for a chat. However, Harry declined their offer, asking only for Ron to fetch his school bag from the dormitory. "I missed some homework," Harry explained, sitting on his bed and rummaging through his bag. Under the concerned gazes of Ron and Hermione, he feigned a relaxed demeanor. "I need a quiet environment to work on my history of magic homework, so you can go about your own business." Harry's feeble attempt at lying was transparent. Ron, worried, was about to speak, but Hermione silenced him with a sharp jab to the ribs. "Okay, Harry," Hermione said, glaring at Ron. "If you need any help," she quickly glanced at the invisibility cloak peeking from Harry's school bag. "Ron and I will be in the lounge. You can call us anytime." With that, she dragged the bewildered Ron out of the hospital wing. Time slipped by, and soon the sky was dark, devoid of any light. As a frequent visitor to the hospital wing, Harry was well acquainted with Madame Pomfrey's routine. At 9 o'clock, she emerged from her small office to check the wards. Seeing Harry lying obediently in bed, she nodded in satisfaction, then scolded two first-year Ravenclaw students with colds to go to sleep, extinguishing the candles throughout the ward. In the darkness, Harry listened intently. Once he was sure Madame Pomfrey had returned to her office, he glanced at the two first-years, who were whispering a few beds away. He quietly slid off the edge of his bed. When it came to sneaking around the castle at night, Harry was unmatched at Hogwarts. If he claimed to be the third best, no one would dare claim second. The top spot was shared by Ron's older brothers, Fred and George. Though it wasn't yet curfew, the castle was deserted. Along the way, Harry only encountered a few fifth-year students preparing for their Owls exams, and Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle heading towards the Slytherin dungeons, all looking bewildered. Something felt off. Harry glanced at the darkened sky, puzzled. He instinctively followed them for a few steps, but was repelled by a foul stench. Oh, right! Harry suddenly recalled that Professor Atticus Blaine had announced before the recent competition that the winning house would earn 50 extra points, while the losing house would have to clean the owlery. In that competition, Malfoy and Parkinson, despite having a good chance, lost due to a series of unfortunate events. Knowing Slytherin's tendency to shift blame, Harry suspected Malfoy would bear the brunt of the responsibility, especially since he and Parkinson had pushed Harry and Neville off the boat. This was likely one of the few redeeming moments in Slytherin's eyes, so Malfoy would face the consequences. Crabbe and Goyle were probably roped in by Malfoy. Watching the dejected figures of the three Slytherins, Harry felt an urge to smirk. But recalling Malfoy's noble behavior after the incident, he hesitated. Shaking his head silently, he turned and walked in another direction. On the third floor, on his way to Professor Blaine's office, Harry paused outside Professor Lupin's office. This year's professor, known for his gentle demeanor and praised teaching methods, had earned Harry's admiration. The relationship between Atticus Blaine and his students transcended the typical boundaries of a teacher-student dynamic. It's rare for a wizard to call Voldemort by his first name, Harry thought, recalling the last time the older students visited Hogsmeade and his encounter with Lupin. Ultimately, Harry decided against visiting Professor Lupin's office. Although he was concerned about Lupin's health, he didn't want to disturb his rest. Harry felt much more at ease visiting Professor Blaine. Professor Blaine had helped him shed the unwanted identity of the heir of the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets. So far, Harry hadn't mentioned a word of this to Ron or Hermione. He had spent most of August with Professor Blaine, and to be honest, it had been a delightful summer. Professor Blaine never acted superior or condescending. Instead, he treated Harry with the warmth and understanding of a friend. After ensuring there were no other people or wandering ghosts nearby, Harry removed the invisibility cloak, crumpled it up, and stuffed it into his school bag. He then knocked on the door of Professor Blaine's office. Professor Blaine appeared in front of him, dressed in gray pajamas and a plain robe with a dark green background adorned with silver patterns. He looked a bit tired, with dark circles under his striking lavender eyes, and his gray hair was slightly disheveled, as if he hadn't ventured out that day. "Harry," Atticus said, recognizing him even before opening the door. He raised an eyebrow and smiled. "You seem to be recovering well." "That's right, Professor Blaine," Harry replied awkwardly. "Madame Pomfrey thinks so too. She believes I can be discharged early." Atticus pursed his lips, glancing at the bag in Harry's hand. He didn't call out Harry's fib, but instead stepped aside and said gently, "Of course, it's a bit chilly outside. Let's come in and chat." This understanding nature was what made Professor Blaine so beloved. Harry's spirits lifted as he followed Professor Blaine into the office. "Professor Lupin?" Harry blinked in surprise when he saw a man in an old wizard robe with a noticeably sickly face sitting by the fireplace. "Professor Lupin?" "Good evening, Harry," Lupin greeted, his smile soft in the glow of the golden flames. "It's good to see you looking so refreshed." After speaking, Lupin glanced at Atticus, who had returned to his desk. "Thank you for your care and help these past few days, Atticus. I think I can resume my duties tomorrow since Harry has something to discuss with you." "Oh, it's actually nothing," Harry said, embarrassed. "I just heard from Ron and Hermione yesterday. I mean, after I lost consciousness, that you performed some amazing magic." Atticus and Remus exchanged amused glances, unable to suppress their smiles. "So," Atticus said cheerfully, "did you come here just to praise me, Mr. Potter?" End of this chapter.